Maybe Nicki Minaj is so intent on calling out demons in the industry because she knows what it is like to bind herself to one. Nicki Minaj knows demons. She talks about them with the certainty of someone who has seen them, fought them, and perhaps even fed off their presence. In her words, demons are not abstract spirits, but executives in tailored suits, critics with keyboards, and other artists who she believes thrive, but only at her expense. They are symbols of the Dark Lord, betrayal, corruption, and control, the forces that, in her telling, conspire to dim her light. Over time, this language of spiritual warfare has become the spine of her mythology. Minaj frames the pitfalls of her career as evidence of an otherworldly battle of good and evil, with herself not simply on the side of righteousness, but chosen by the righteous. In recent years, Nicki Minaj has increasingly cast herself as a victim of conspiracies within the music industry, portraying her struggles as battles against powerful forces scheming to undermine her. From accusing rival artists of benefiting from payola to suggesting that entire corporate entities are out to destroy her family. The idea of being chosen by God has long been used as a tool to justify power, persecution, or creative genius. Kanye West embodies this most explicitly, proclaiming himself the voice God appointed. His audience functions as both fan base and congregation, where to question his methods is to question divine will. Donald Trump deploys the same logic in politics, calling himself the chosen one and suggesting that his presidency was ordained by God. His followers, many drawn from evangelical traditions, interpret criticism as spiritual warfare. When public figures frame themselves as chosen, their followers often respond with a loyalty that borders on worship. History offers clear examples of people who used scripture to establish total obedience and cast doubt as heresy. Modern culture reproduces this dynamic in digital form. Online fandoms operate as decentralized cults built around charismatic personalities who claim unique access to truth. The structure is familiar. A leader who insists they are misunderstood or persecuted, an enemy to fight, and rituals of devotion like buying merch, repeating mantras, or attacking critics on social media or in the real world. Influencer culture and stan armies rely on this emotional economy. Followers defend their chosen figure not just as an artist or thinker, but as a moral cause. In 2018, Nicki Minaj vented about her Queen album's commercial performance with a series of pretty explosive tweets. She claimed the streaming giant Spotify had to teach her a lesson for debuting her music on Apple's platform, suggesting that Spotify deliberately reduced her promotion and visibility as an act of retaliation. Whenever she hit an obstacle, someone behind the scenes with supernatural and evil power must have pulled the strings against her. She has spun one conspiracy or another in the years since. Nikki's conspiracy narrative reached a new intensity in the mid 2020s with her very public war against Rock Nation, the entertainment company founded by Jay-Z. Nikki's issues with Rock Nation has simmered for years. In 2025, these tensions erupted into full blown allegations. Minaj took to social media with claims that Rock Nation and its leadership were orchestrating a campaign to ruin her life. The flashpoint came when Nikki signal boosted an interview with the estranged daughter of the company's CEO, who alleged that Rock Nation had abused Minaj's freedom of speech and attacked her family, and even targeted her young child and husband. Nikki co signed these claims using her platform to validate and amplify the notion that Rock Nation was running an organized smear and harassment campaign against her. There has never been any proof. No text messages, emails, memos, no witnesses who offer verifiable details of meetings held in Lucifer's gazebo. On Twitter, Minaj directly addressed those she felt were doubting her story. Then she issued a warning laden with religious imagery. Every single angel ever created fights for me, she said. Vengeance is the Lord's. Be careful. No one who conspired on the wrong side will go unpunished. In one instance, Nikki alleged that someone seemingly linked to Rock Nation attempted to fabricate a lie about her husband, Kenneth Petty, in order to put him in legal jeopardy and separate him from his wife. They used money, power, and influence to tear apart my family, she said, creating lies to lock up my husband. She insinuated that these tactics were payback for her refusal to fall in line with certain industry figures' wishes. But in reality, Nicki Minaj's husband is a convicted and registered sex offender who keeps getting into legal trouble. And there is no conspiracy in the fact that he cannot be near schools, parks, or playgrounds. Nothing disrupts family time quite like being married to a man who is legally barred from the spaces most families frequent. So, while Minaj frames their household as the innocent target of demonic industry forces, the far more mundane truth is that her husband's own history creates the limitations she attributes to persecution. Her insistence on external villains reframes a self inflicted wound as a moral crusade. By casting the industry as a den of evil while defending someone whose record embodies what many believers would call demonic, she performs a moral sleight of hand. Her demonology becomes self protective theater, a way to outsource guilt and sanctify complicity. In this light, the language of spiritual warfare does not expose evil so much as it disguises it, turning the devil into a convenient metaphor for everything but the devil himself. This is where her mythology begins to collapse under its own weight. The demonic cabal that supposedly stalks her family becomes a convenient substitute for accountability. To admit that her personal choices have real world consequences would shatter the divine narrative she has built, the story of a chosen woman forever punished for her truth. In that way, Minaj's demonology serves not only as a defense mechanism, but as a creative reimagining of guilt itself. Sin recast as persecution, consequence transfigured into curse. At one point, Minaj tweeted and later deleted that Jay-Z owes her between $100 and $200 million, dollars, implying that due to Rock Nation's alleged but never proven actions against her, she missed out on massive earnings. She added that she would give some of that money back to her fans for their college tuition once it was paid, a statement that blended fan service with her conspiratorial narrative. This unusual assertion left many scratching their heads. On what grounds would Jay Z owe Nicki nine figures, and by what means would she get it? Nikki didn't detail any of this, but the claim feeds into her broader narrative that the industry's power brokers, epitomized by Jay Z and Rock Nation, have economically sabotaged her and thus figuratively stolen money that should have been hers and, by extension, her fans. On its face, this sounds like generosity, but in practice, it echoes the logic of cult leadership, the promise of material reward for spiritual loyalty. Cult leaders throughout history have sustained their followings not just through fear of God's wrath or charisma, but through visions of coming prosperity, salvation, ascension, paradise, or wealth. Jim Jones promised a socialist utopia in Guyana. David Koresh promised survival in the apocalypse. Marshall Applewhite promised transcendence aboard a cosmic vessel. Nicki Minaj's version is updated for the digital age. Tuition instead of eternal life, cash instead of communion, but the transaction is the same. By framing financial reward as both reparation and reward, Minaj transforms her fans' devotion into a form of moral labor. Their role in her spiritual warfare becomes not just to defend her online, but to help manifest divine justice. In return, they would receive her grace, a scholarship, a retweet, a seat at the table of the chosen. It's a soft form of economic messianism, the kind that collapses capitalism and faith into the same transaction. This promise mirrors the theology of the prosperity gospel, a strain of modern evangelicalism that teaches wealth is proof of divine favor and suffering is a sign of insufficient faith. Televangelists have long trafficked in this logic, promising healing, blessings, or financial breakthrough to those who sow seeds into their ministries. Minaj's rhetoric follows the same pattern, reframing material success as spiritual reward and struggle as persecution by dark forces. Her fans are encouraged to see her victories as their own and her setbacks as attacks on their shared faith. By blending money, loyalty, and divine purpose, she transforms her brand into a kind of digital church where belief in her narrative is both a moral stance and an investment in their future salvation. This tactic works because it blurs moral and material redemption. The fan who fights on her behalf is not simply defending a celebrity. No, no. They are proving their worthiness to receive the blessing when it arrives. The longer the promised payout is delayed, the more valuable their faith becomes. In that suspended state between loyalty and reward, Nicki Minaj's followers behave less like a fan base and more like a congregation waiting for the rapture, a digital flock convinced that their salvation will come once their prophetess defeats her demons. Nicki's fans have amplified this framing. On Twitter, one wrote, "She's only been exposing the demons of this industry. If you are against her, you probably sold your soul." But in Nicki's most recent public battle with Cardi B, many self proclaimed barbs took to the internet to disavow her after years of unquestioning loyalty. Every cult has its moment of awakening, the fracture between faith and recognition. It rarely arrives as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet accumulation of inconsistencies, prophecies that never come true, punishments that exceed the sin, promises of deliverance that curdle into dependence. Those who wake up from such systems describe the same dawning of realization that their devotion was not feeding something divine, but feeding someone's ego. The rituals, the vocabulary of persecution and righteousness, the illusion of a shared mission. All of it was scaffolding for control. Nikki's fans are starting to look at her and her motives through fresh eyes, and they have begun to wonder, maybe Nicki Minaj is so intent on calling out demons in the industry because she is one, a creature born of the very forces she condemns. Her career was forged in the same fire of ego, exploitation, and spectacle that she now frames as satanic. The demon in most mythologies is not an outsider, but a fallen insider, a being who once served the light and grew corrupted by pride, hunger, or disillusionment. She rose within the machine she now condemns, mastering its every trick: controversy as currency, vulnerability as branding, dominance as self defense. Her accusations of evil read less like revelations than like projections, an artist railing against the mirror image of her own making. The industry's so called demons, greed, manipulation, control, are the same forces that sustain her self written mythos. Every feud fuels engagement. Every grievance tightens the bond with her followers. Every proclamation of spiritual warfare keeps her name burning in the algorithmic ether. To fight demons is, in a sense, to feed them. If demons are defined by their refusal to bow, their defiance against order, then perhaps she isn't fighting them at all. Perhaps she has simply learned to speak their language better than anyone. Joe Budden is a porch primate, clutching his robe over his naked cheeks, talking about the neighbors who live better than him. Curtis Jackson is a man so addicted to conflict that he mistakes cruelty against Black women for relevance in a white world. And Stephen A. Smith's Black pride and so called respect for Black women is more compromised than a BLM mural in a police station. Stephen A. Smith is known for his absurdist sports commentary, and in recent years, he has built a reputation and following for his constant, rage filled, screaming meltdowns about Black women in sports and beyond. His rants are ritual humiliation disguised as wisdom and insight. For his mostly white male audience, Stephen A. Smith has long positioned himself as a truth teller, the man unafraid to say what others will not. But what he says, and more importantly, who he says it about, constantly reveals a deeper loyalty to white supremacy disguised as objectivity. His repeated public attacks on Black women in sports, journalism, and politics serve as a performance of dominance meant to reassure white audiences and corporate gatekeepers that he can keep other Black people, especially outspoken Black women, in line. He is reinforcing the idea that Black women's confidence and cultural fluency are threats to white respectability, aka traditional American values. That posture is not accidental. It is a feature of white centered media systems that reward Black men who performatively discipline Black women on their behalf. Stephen A's success depends on that behavior. His rants become viral, his brand grows, and ESPN and XM radio continue to profit from the spectacle of a Black man whipping Black women for being too loud, too proud, too smart, too independent, too sexy, or too visible. It is the economy of racial hierarchy playing out in real time. By siding with white respectability politics over solidarity with Black women, Stephen A becomes a token in the very systems that work overtime to silence and humiliate both Black women and Black men. His commentary operates as cultural gatekeeping, reinforcing the message that Black women can exist in power only if they perform it in a way that comforts white sensibilities. A reoccurring target of Stephen A's is Angel Reese, the LSU basketball star who led her team to a national title and later joined the WNBA. Not long ago, Angel Reese expressed a bold dream. She wanted people to wear her upcoming signature Reebok sneakers just like how they wear Jordans everywhere. This comment was an aspirational wish about her future success and legacy. But Smith pounced on it. He went on air and mocked Angel Reese's ambitions. He wanted to humiliate her for having the audacity to imagine greatness. It is a familiar pattern in Stephen A's work. Find a confident Black woman and interpret her ambition as arrogance that needs to be checked. And if anyone can speak to the analogy of greatness, it's Stephen A. Smith. He can't dribble to save his life, but he is the Michael Jordan of coonery. His history of verbal violence against Black women dates back years. In 2016, he attacked Aisha Curry after she tweeted frustration about the NBA Finals. Smith took it upon himself to scold her on how a wife should behave. He did not analyze basketball, he analyzed a woman's behavior, deciding what was acceptable for her to say as someone's wife. Meanwhile, he is not married. Stephen A lectured Aisha Curry by favorably comparing LeBron James's wife, Savannah, to her. He weaponized one Black woman against another, suggesting that Aisha know her place and be more like the silent, supportive trad wife he perceives Savannah to be. Smith even commented on their looks, calling Savannah something special, while qualifying that Aisha is beautiful, but it was another passive aggressive dig, the language of a man who uses appraisal to justify demeaning a Black woman. His first instinct when confronted with Black women's experiences is to divide, to rank, and to suggest one is inherently inferior to the other. And now, in 2025, Stephen A. has sparked outrage again after criticizing Representative Jasmine Crockett's speaking style on his Sirius XM show. He described her as using street verbiage and questioned whether her approach was appropriate for someone representing 750,000 constituents, implying that Crockett's way of speaking was unprofessional or unfit for leadership. This is coded language rooted in stereotypes about Black women's expression and intellect. Stephen A. framed her communication as a liability rather than an asset, suggesting she consider other political roles instead, even though he has never been elected to anything except the presidency of the minstrel show. Stephen A. routinely overlooks behavior from male politicians while disproportionately chastising Black women for their assertiveness. Faced with public pressure, Smith apologized and claimed he misunderstood Crockett's cultural vernacular because apparently authentically Black is a language he does not understand because apparently he doesn't speak it. But it was too late. The incident reinforced a growing awareness that Stephen A. Smith consistently devalues Black women's confidence and authority while cloaking his bias in the language of professional critique, even though he doesn't have the professional experience to hand down those critiques. Looking at these incidents collectively, a pattern of misogyny and anti Blackness is evident. And he is not alone. Last week, Joe Budden brought up Dochi on his podcast, suggesting there's something wrong with her, that she's not working hard enough, that her visibility somehow signals a decline. His intentions were as bare as a coked up naked man wandering the halls. He brought her up to stir controversy, to feed the outrage economy, to make money from the spectacle of disrespect. When it comes to rapping, Joe Budden cannot touch Dochi. He has never won a Grammy. He has never won a BET or NAACP award. Dochi has won all three. She is headlining her own tour, opening for Kendrick Lamar's GNX tour at select cities, and performing at nearly every major festival on earth, including Glastonbury, Lollapalooza, Austin City Limits, and Outside Lands. Joe Budden didn't even make it to Summer Jam lineup. The last time he hit a big stage was Hot 97 Jam in 2003, more than 20 years ago. As a washed up rapper with no material relevance to music, Budden's only remaining currency is controversy. He monetizes provocation. His podcast thrives on conflict, and he often generates it by aiming at Black women whose success and artistry dwarf his own. It is a classic formula. Pick a target who is visible, talented, and loved, preferably a woman, then insult her under the guise of critique. The outrage brings clicks, the clicks bring dollars, and the cycle continues. But beneath that cynicism is something older and uglier, the reflex of men who feel eclipsed by Black women succeeding in spaces they once dominated or never stepped foot in. When a man's legacy is shrinking, he attacks women whose stars are still rising. He frames their success as suspect, their work ethic as lacking, and their confidence, of course, as arrogance. What he is really fighting is irrelevance, not Black women. Joe Budden does not critique women like Dochi because he is a cultural authority. He does it because he is an attention starved relic. Curtis 50 Shilling Jackson has also built a long record of hostility towards Black women, attacking them as if his very life depends on it. And the examples are too many to count. In late 2024, he made another round of disparaging remarks about the new generation of women rappers, the majority of which are Black. 50 Shilling complained that too many popular women MCs were only selling sex appeal. He went on to argue that the dominance of hypersexualized content from women in rap might be damaging to female culture. Recently, when asked about Taylor Swift's new album during an interview with a gossip outlet, he went out of his way to shade Travis Kelce's ex girlfriend, who is a Black woman. She was not the topic, but he simply could not help himself. These men are just a few examples of Black men who all operate on the same continuum of misogyny and white supremacy. And they uphold white supremacy by attacking Black women under the guise of informed or intelligent criticism. They speak from positions that depend on proximity to whiteness, on demonstrating that they are not like the women they ridicule. They perform for systems that reward their cruelty with visibility and money. Whether it is Stephen A. yelling from a TV studio, Budden ranting into a microphone, or 50 Cent smirking through another tired interview, each plays the same role. At its core, white supremacy demands that Black women be quiet, compliant, and grateful for proximity to power. It idealizes a respectable femininity defined by submission, restraint, and deference to male authority, traits that have always been coded through whiteness. Within that framework, a Black woman who speaks with conviction is read as angry. One who asserts her boundaries is labeled difficult. And one who takes pride in her voice or her body or her skill is seen as indecent. The entire structure relies on silencing and disciplining Black women, both symbolically and publicly, to preserve white comfort. The message underlying the words and attacks by Black men against Black women is that a Black woman's ambition must always be softened, her intellect translated, her power tempered. The expectation is not excellence, but obedience. They reassure white audiences that even within Black success, the old hierarchies still hold. And until those audiences stop clapping, they will keep performing. These men don't care about Black women, and their attacks aren't some misguided attempt at constructive criticism or support. It's desperation, envy, and hatred through a gaze of white praise and approval, not Black solidarity. Joe Budden is a porch primate, clutching his robe over his naked cheeks, talking about the neighbors who live better than him. Curtis Jackson is a man so addicted to conflict that he mistakes cruelty against Black women for relevance in a white world. And Stephen A. Smith's Black pride and so called respect for Black women is more compromised than a BLM mural in a police station, more compromised than a Juneteenth sale at Walmart, more compromised than a DEI panel at Fox News, more compromised than a dashiki made in a sweatshop, more compromised than an HBCU homecoming sponsored by the NRA, more compromised than a Black pastor at a MAGA rally, more compromised than a civil rights documentary narrated by Candace Owens, more compromised than a BET award presented by Ben Carson, more compromised than a Wakanda Forever collection on Shein, more compromised than a reparations rally led by Clarence Thomas. The original COINTELPRO didn't end, it adapted. It shed its wiretaps and trench coats and slipped into algorithmic timelines, parasocial bonds, and live stream reaction channels. And now, in 2025, it's moving through hip hop, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. This time, the agents aren't feds in disguise. They're wounded artists, right wing proxies, and clout chasing creators handing over the culture in exchange for protection, power, or attention. And MAGA, an authoritarian movement built on grievance, spectacle, and cultural warfare, knows exactly how to use them. MAGA doesn't need to silence hip hop, it needs to reframe it, redefine who speaks for it, recast truth tellers as villains, and glorify reactionary voices as victims. Their plan isn't subtle, but it is strategic. It's a slow, deliberate infiltration designed to collapse hip hop's radical core by empowering the very people who want revenge against it. First, there's Drake. His lawsuit against UMG, framed as a response to harassment and industry payola, isn't just a business move, it's a political signal. Drake is publicly inviting the federal government under Trump 2.0 to intervene in hip hop. He's not fighting to protect the culture, he's asking the state to punish it on his behalf. He's chosen litigation as his revenge track. Instead of dropping bars, he's dropping motions. This is more than a celebrity tantrum. It's a power play that gives MAGA exactly what it wants: a pretext for regulation, a wedge to delegitimize Black artists, and a victim with global reach who can make conservative intervention look like cultural justice. But Drake isn't acting alone. He's part of a loose alliance of bitter, disgraced, pathetic, or reactionary figures whose personal vendettas now serve the far right's cultural war strategy. Nicki Minaj, long defined by her need for domination and revenge, recently turned to MAGA Congresswoman Anna Luna for help after a petty online feud, not because she was in real danger, but because it served her narrative that she, a powerful celebrity, was under attack by the industry, that her enemies were part of some corrupt machine. Representative Luna seized the opportunity, publicly declaring her concern for unchecked corruption in rap and offering to escalate the matter to law enforcement. What's happening here isn't confusion, it's choreography. Minaj gets to play victim while Luna builds MAGA legitimacy inside hip hop circles that normally wouldn't give her the time of day. Meanwhile, Angela Stanton King, a Trump pardoned conservative operative, publicly claimed to have brokered an alliance between Nicki Minaj and Tory Lanez, a man convicted of shooting Megan Thee Stallion. This is how COINTELPRO works in 2025, not through infiltration by strangers, but through empowerment of insiders who no longer feel protected by the culture that once uplifted them. MAGA doesn't need to create dissent. It weaponizes existing grievances. It targets artists who have already been publicly humiliated, exposed, or outgrown, and offers them a way to get even. Drake, Nicki, Tory, Kanye, and Lil Wayne have one thing in common. They all feel betrayed by the very culture they used to dominate. And MAGA knows how to exploit that feeling. They frame these artists as martyrs. They echo their stories of persecution. They offer political protection in exchange for influence. And they repurpose their platforms to undermine everyone who still believes hip hop should stand for something. The result is a slow inversion of the culture itself. Artists who speak truth, challenge power, or defend Black lives get recast as elitists, industry plants, or woke puppets. Meanwhile, those who embody chaos, violence, and misogyny are elevated as victims of censorship, shady industry deals, and cancel culture. The culture becomes hollowed out from the inside, its values warped, its language turned against itself. This dynamic was on full display during the 2024 presidential election. A significant portion of the doubt and hostility directed at Kamala Harris came from inside the House, whether it was YouTube personalities, podcast hosts, or once respected artists. Many chose to cast Harris not as a vulnerable target of far right attacks, but as a suspicious actor aligned with elite interests. They didn't critique policy with substance. They smeared her with innuendo, memes, and coded anti Blackness dressed as political skepticism. That suspicion helped suppress enthusiasm among young Black voters, particularly men, and gave MAGA's messaging room to circulate in spaces that once would have rejected it outright. We are already seeing this play out in the broader content ecosystem. YouTube reactors, TikTok analysts, and podcast grifters have become soft infrastructure for ideological infiltration. When Tory Lanez was convicted, hundreds of creators spun the narrative into one of conspiracy and injustice. When Megan spoke up, she was cast as a liar, an agent of the system, or worse, a pawn of feminist elites. This is cultural surveillance by proxy. The federal government no longer needs to monitor lyrics when content creators will dissect and distribute them voluntarily. The state doesn't need to build files when comment sections already provide location data, emotional states, and interpersonal conflicts in real time. And once an artist like Drake starts streaming with right wing adjacent personalities, or Nicki starts tagging GOP reps and the FBI, those same creators fall in line. They frame legal maneuvers as revolutionary. They justify the alliance with it's bigger than politics. They rationalize betrayal as protection. But the end game is clear. Once MAGA is inside, it will burn hip hop down. Black music has always existed in conversation with the fight for human dignity, from the plantation fields to the Montgomery bus boycotts, from the March on Washington to Ferguson. Music has been a vessel for Black survival, memory, resistance, and vision. It has documented every phase of the human rights struggle in America and beyond. It has mourned the lost, uplifted the living, and reminded the world of whatever it attempted to suppress and forget. Rap was born out of that lineage. It's not a departure from blues or jazz or funk. It is their air. It was never only about beats and rhymes. It was about reclaiming voice in a country that silences it. It was about describing the conditions of the street with the same weight that blues once gave to the Delta and jazz gave to the migration north. Federal agencies under Trump don't want to protect rap. They want to use disgruntled celebrities as pretext to surveil, censor, and dismantle it. Drake's lawsuit could lead to real investigations of labels, execs, platforms, and artists under the guise of fairness, but driven by the same authoritarian instinct that fuels book bans and DEI crackdowns. If successful, the backlash against so called corruption in hip hop will come not from the community, but from the state. Artists will be scrutinized for their political views, not their work ethic. Lyrics will be policed, not promoted. The entire culture will be repackaged as dangerous, immoral, or un American. While MAGA props up its chosen victims as evidence that hip hop needs saving, rap plays a global role as one of the last accessible platforms for speaking truth to power. It started as a response to state neglect and systemic violence, but now it resonates across continents, carried by people who use it to document injustice, confront power, and protect memory. In places where protest is criminalized and truth is treated as a threat, rap becomes a signal flare. Its presence in the margins reveals where the pressure is greatest. Its suppression tells us exactly where freedom is under attack. And in this moment of overt oppression, both in the United States and around the world, the stakes for rap have never been higher. The genre absorbs everything: economic instability, political corruption, algorithmic control, cultural erasure, and turns it into language. It becomes both a reflection and a tool. Rap remains one of the purest expressions of free speech. It speaks directly, often dangerously, in defiance of systems designed to punish honesty. It gives language to the experiences many try to bury. It brings the periphery to the center, making it impossible to ignore. In the face of censorship, surveillance, and political fear, rap still manages to say what needs to be said. As goes rap, so goes the world. If the world is descending into chaos and authoritarianism, rap will bear witness. If there is still fight left, still honesty worth protecting, still breath behind the words, rap will carry that too. It always has. For as long as we exist, it always will. Or will it? In 2025, MAGA's agenda is no longer limited to reshaping law and dismantling institutions. It's actively working to seize control of cultural production itself. And artificial intelligence is the perfect vehicle. Across the country, Republicans are pushing to block states from regulating AI, proposing federal preemption that would strip local governments of any authority to manage how AI affects privacy, biometric data, or creative labor. It's a coordinated power grab that places total control of this transformative technology in the hands of the federal government, corporate developers, and compliant cultural figures. And in hip hop, that compliance is already here, wrapped in the form of innovation. Enter Lupe Fiasco and Timbaland, two artists once known for their cultural impact who are now positioning themselves at the center of AI's push into rap. On the surface, these moves are framed as forward thinking, but under the hood, they serve as normalization, making it palatable, even exciting, to turn rap into a computational product detached from the lived experience, politics, and community that gave it life. This isn't harmless experimentation, it's a restructuring of hip hop's entire creative logic. AI tools prioritize rhythm, catchiness, and repetition over political specificity or emotional truth. They're optimized for platform profit and algorithmic visibility, not for message or memory. The more artists adopt AI, the more rap becomes standardized, predictable, and non threatening to the state or corporate power. And MAGA's push for federal AI control, and what you get is a seamless pipeline where the government can shape not just how AI is regulated, but what kind of rap gets produced, promoted, and preserved. We are not headed towards a debate over rap's future. We're heading towards a coordinated attack on its soul. This is COINTELPRO with a ring light, its cultural destabilization with celebrity cosigns, its state surveillance justified by stand wars, lawsuits, and live streams. If we don't name it, they will define it for us. If we don't defend the culture, they will rewrite it. And if we don't understand this alliance for what it is, a Trojan horse backed by federal power, we will lose the most potent voice of resistance our people have ever had. The plan is in motion. The question now is whether we recognize it in time.
I don't care that he's but I don't care. I know that he did. I know.
Joe Budden has built a career out of proximity to combustion. He doesn't light every match in the culture, but he's always the first to sprint toward the smoke with a microphone and a can of gasoline. His platform thrives on heat, conflict, rumor, humiliation, and the illusion of insider knowledge. Joe Budden has perfected the art of turning other people's chaos into his own content. Whether mocking Megan the Stallion's trauma or casting suspicion on Tory Lane's guilt, amplifying conspiracies about Drake's lawsuit against UMG, or claiming that Kendrick Lamar used bots to win a rap war, Joe frames speculation as evidence and spectacle as fact. What makes him dangerous is not that he lies outright, but that he performs convictions so convincingly that gossip feels like gospel. And when the backlash inevitably comes, he does what every good pyromaniac does: coughs on the smoke, blames the fire, and calls himself the victim. In 2020, Megan Thee Stallion was shot by Tory Lanez, who was later convicted. As the case unfolded, Joe Budden repeatedly weighed in with biased and inaccurate commentary, promoting conspiracy theories favoring Tory Lanez. When it was revealed that Megan initially told emergency responders she had stepped on glass, but later explained she lied to protect Lanez, Budden feigned confusion and poured more gas on the fire of doubt. During the lead up to Lanez's trial, Joe admitted on air that he personally didn't like Megan. He acknowledged his bias against her despite not actually knowing her personally. By painting Megan as a bad actor, Joe effectively questioned her credibility as a victim. The narrative fed into a broader online Megan hate train he himself noted was happening on social media. Such comments contributed to a climate where Megan, the victim of violence, was turned into a villain. Amid the Tory Lanez trial, Joe issued an apology for some of his remarks. He said he was sorry for his careless comments about Megan after reflecting on the issue. Specifically, he apologized for the way he joked about her mental health, acknowledging that his remarks were not funny and that joining the pylon was wrong. More tellingly, after his half hearted apology, he continued to promote conspiracies about the shooting. Even after Tory Lanez was found guilty, Joe continued to push narratives undermining that outcome. In 2024, he floated a theory that unnamed higher ups had set Tory Lanez up, with Megan used as just a pawn in this. That summer, Joe claimed without evidence that he knew who was really responsible, even asserting that he knew how the gun got into the car and suggesting it had been planted. He implied that Megan didn't make this story up, but the entire situation was above her pay grade, hinting at shadowy figures who orchestrated the entire incident. For listeners already inclined toward conspiracy thinking, this validated their suspicion that there must be a hidden story behind the official one. For audiences steeped in misogynistic online spaces, it became a convenient way to discredit Megan's testimony without explicitly saying they don't believe women. Joe's confident, conversational tone made the claim feel authoritative rather than speculative, which helped it spread quickly. Each repetition chipped away at public trust in verified information and strengthened the reflex to treat women's accounts of violence as exaggerated or fabricated. In that sense, Joe's casual "I know" contributed to a wider culture where rumor masquerades as truth and doubting a Black woman's pain is recast as critical thinking. It reinforced a long-standing racist idea that Black women are not victims or that their pain is somehow less credible. By questioning Megan's character and promoting the notion that she might have orchestrated her own victimization, Joe echoed a cultural script that has long cast Black women as unreliable narrators of their own survival. His commentary gave new digital life to an old bias. Black women are too strong to be hurt, too loud to be believed, and too complicated or calculated to be innocent. When someone with Joe Budden's reach and perceived authority treats a shooting survivor's account as entertainment or speculation, it signals to audiences predisposed towards misogyny and racism that skepticism of Black women is not only acceptable, but rational. The second case study involves Joe Budden's role as a commentator during the high profile Drake versus Kendrick Lamar feud and Drake's unusual battle with UMG in court. That legal fight stretched into 2025, and Joe's commentary throughout displayed his flair for sensationalism, insider gossip, and merciless mockery. Joe positioned himself as a key observer of the feud and holder of truths, often delivering supporting so called insider information to his audience. He claimed that before the diss tracks dropped, Drake and Kendrick had a private phone call to establish rules for their battle. True or not, by telling the story, Joe cast himself as an insider with privileged access, blurring the line between fact and speculation. A particularly striking moment during the legal battle came when Joe claimed he knew Kendrick used bots, arguing that bots were part of how one wins a war against Drake. He suggested that unusual engagement metrics reflected deliberate manipulation. In effect, he validated one of Drake's central legal claims that UMG had artificially boosted Not Like Us. Joe's confident delivery gave the rumor an air of credibility, and what he likely intended as provocative podcast banter ended up cited in Drake's amended complaint as supposed evidence of industry manipulation. Joe Budden was so confident in claiming insider knowledge about Kendrick's use of bots that Drake's legal team included his remarks in their amended complaint against UMG to support Drake's claims. In June 2024, one podcast host stated, "Not only do I not care that Kendrick Lamar, used bots, but I knew he did." Oh my fucking God. Oh, why'd they put that nigga up in this fucking document? He's gonna be insufferable. Y'all know who say that?
I don't care that he used bots. I don't care. I know that he did. I know.
Quote, "Not only do I not care that he used bots, but I knew he did. Y'all didn't know that Kendrick used bots? You thought this was just the first time a Drake record ever had more dislikes than likes? Bots, to me, was a part of how you win the war versus Drake." End quote. By including this, Drake's attorneys turned Joe into an inadvertent witness, someone within hip hop commentary circles who appeared to confirm that bot manipulation was an open secret. What Joe intended as entertainment suddenly carried legal weight, reinforcing Drake's narrative that the industry was complicit in shaping his public defeat. Of course, Joe Budden is happy the lawsuit was dismissed. He was almost certainly, eventually, going to have to face a subpoena. Throughout the feud, Joe kept a tone that mixed drama with delight. He treated Drake versus Kendrick as theater and himself as a ringside commentator. When the lawsuit dismissal broke, Joe redirected the conversation to insult and spectacle. In both cases, Megan Thee Stallion shooting and the Drake Kendrick UMG feud, Joe Budden's behavior followed the same pattern. He profits from provocation while pretending to analyze it, and he positions himself as the insider who knows what others cannot. His commentary spreads misinformation, fuels division. Without his gas can, Joe Budden is just another former rapper, otherwise irrelevant to the current landscape. With it, he is a gossip pyro, drawn to the heat pouring fuel on every fire and then insisting he's only describing the ashes, while also secretly claiming to know who did it and why. In political and cultural theory, accelerationism refers to the idea that the best or perhaps only way to bring about radical change is to intensify the current system's contradictions rather than resist them. When applied culturally, an accelerationist doesn't necessarily want collapse, they just behave as if acceleration itself is productive. They treat chaos, outrage, and moral decline as fuel. They accelerate discourse for its own sake, even when it's destructive. Joe Budden is the closest thing hip hop has to Joe Rogan. Both men are masters of controlled chaos, blurring the line between conversation and combustion. Joe Rogan likes nothing more than to start a fire, and Joe Budden follows the same instinct. Rogan has had a markedly negative impact on the social and political media landscape. His podcast operates not merely as entertainment, but as a broadcast amplifier of extremes, giving fringe ideas air, normalizing conspiracy rhetoric, eroding trust in institutional sources, and shifting what counts as acceptable discourse. By blending performance, skepticism, and blunt force opinion, he reshapes the media environment around him, stretching the boundaries of what people think is normal discourse and making division feel like the natural state of conversation. His comments about Kamala Harris during the 2024 presidential election centered on the claim that her presidency would clamp down on freedom of speech, suggesting she would intensify social media regulation and punish dissenting expression. His framing positioned Harris as a censorial figure, echoing longstanding fears that Democrats want to police speech online. Yet, the reality of the current political moment under Trump's second administration tells a different story. It is Trump, not Harris, who has publicly boasted that, quote, we took the freedom of speech away, end quote, while pursuing punitive actions against comedians, late night hosts, and journalists. Joe Rogan's warning about government overreach has therefore aged into fucking irony. His rhetoric amplifies a false sense of threat from imagined liberal suppression while overlooking the real erosion of freedom of expression taking place in plain sight. The contrast exposes how Rogan's influence distorts public understanding of power. He rails against theoretical censorship from progressives while ignoring the authoritarian silencing now being normalized from the right. Joe Budden's commentary on Kamala Harris reflected his reoccurring mix of cynicism, provocation, and surface level critique. On his podcast, he argued that Harris had fallen short as vice president, claiming she failed to live up to the expectations her candidacy once inspired. When Harris appeared alongside artists like Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion during her campaign, Joe called it insulting to Black men and Latinos, saying it reduced political outreach to a celebrity spectacle. Instead of engaging with her record of leadership, he focused on presentation of symbolism, framing her as pandering and out of touch. The remarks fit his broader pattern, dismissing Black women in power as inauthentic, reframing visibility as manipulation, and treating politics as another arena for gossip. By focusing on image and tone rather than substance, Joe once again turned a discussion about power and presentation into an exercise in performance critique, heat without any tangible political intelligence. Joe Budden isn't going anywhere anytime soon. If anything, his platform is on the rise and he hasn't found a limit on audacity. But his reaction to the outcome of Drake's lawsuit against UMG made some people look at him sideways. After nearly a year of telling tall tales, he suddenly revealed that he had no choice, as if a gun was held to his head just out of frame. It hurts his credibility, but only with those who value integrity. For anyone else who prizes entertainment and even chaos as entertainment, his credibility isn't the currency that matters. What matters is spectacle. Joe Budden's gift is his ability to turn contradiction into content. The more audacious the pivot, the louder the reaction, the higher the views. His audience doesn't seek consistency, they seek sensation. In a digital economy built on outrage and amusement, being unhinged is a feature, not a flaw. Each scandal, each revision, each shouting fit keeps him visible. The line between hypocrisy and performance has blurred entirely. And Joe Budden thrives in that blur, where volatility equals virality and the truth is secondary to the flame. His brand is built on volume. Whoever talks the longest and loudest survives to live another day and pour gas on another fire. There's stupid, and then there's Drake fan stupid. There's stupid, and then there's Drake fan stupid, a particular strain of online delusion. They are not confused or uninformed. They are anti informed. Said another way, being stupid is the primary strategy of OVOs. When Drake filed pre action petitions in November last year, OVOs claimed UMG was terrified. When he withdrew one petition in January of this year, OVOs said he was forcing a secret settlement, that he had UMG right where he wanted them. When he filed the lawsuit, they called it proof he was winning. They said Drake's lyrics were fact, but Kendrick's were defamation. When UMG moved to dismiss, OVO said they were scared of Drake and throwing settlement offers at him, even though Drake himself said he had no interest in settling. When Drake filed motions to compel for evidence, they said he'd soon replace Lucian Grange and expose Kendrick Lamar. At oral arguments, they said the judge's questions meant UMG was going to lose the motion. They said the judge was no fool and threw their confidence behind her. During the wait, they declared victory before the ruling ever existed. When the judge dismissed all of Drake's claims this past week, they ignored the legal reasoning. The judge ruled the lyrics were Kendrick's opinion, but OVO said she okayed defamation. They insisted public belief made it defamatory anyway. When the docket closed, they said the case wasn't over because he can appeal and claimed the case is on hold pending an appeal. Now they claim the judge doesn't understand the sequence of events. After saying she should have only focused on the lyrics of Not Like Us, now they say she should have looked beyond the diss tracks to find proof that Kendrick provoked Drake into dropping push ups. At every turn, they've been wrong for nearly a year, and they're on the internet today, strong and still wrong. Why is that? Well, the answer is simple. OVOs are stupid and they like it that way. In fact, they need it that way because that's what works for them to control the alternate reality they're desperate to maintain. In reality, Drake's two pre action petitions were precursors, not an indication of a victory. They sought court authorized discovery before a formal suit to see whether enough evidence existed to justify a complaint. But Drake did not go through with those petitions. When he withdrew one petition and then filed the New York complaint, OVO's reframed procedural timing as strategic genius. That initial misreading is key. It's the ignition point for the pattern of willful stupidity. At every subsequent stage, the discovery motions, service of subpoenas, two motions to compel, the motion to dismiss, oral arguments, and the final order, the same reflex repeated. Their premise has always been Drake can't lose because he's a victim and UMG is corrupt. And the mechanism that they used was the willful misinterpretation of legal procedure as proof of winning. The result was to interpret every neutral event as confirmation of victory. When the outcome contradicted their expectation, they did not reevaluate their premises. They simply generated new conspiracies. The judge is biased. The judge was bribed. The judge favored Kendrick. The judge doesn't understand. And they did that to protect their belief structure. That's motivated reasoning, but the refusal to engage with plainly stated judicial rationale moves it into willful stupidity, the conscious rejection of accessible reality. There's an important escalation here. It's the collective refusal to understand and how that becomes a performative weapon. OVOs not only willfully misunderstand, but use that misunderstanding to attack others, lawyers, journalists, Kendrick's audience, as biased or stupid. It's not ignorance born of absence of knowledge, it's ignorance needed as their identity armor. That turns stupidity into a sort of tool of domination, a way to control discourse by exhausting those trying to inject facts. You can't argue with someone who prizes not knowing. Reason and stupid don't sit at the same table. We don't even share snacks. Drake's argument, it's defamatory because people believed it, and his OVO's echoing of that logic are identical to misinformation movements everywhere. It's true because it spread. The court explicitly rejected that reasoning, and OVOs, in turn, rejected the court. What's fascinating is that the ruling itself is about public ignorance, the difference between opinion and fact, belief and proof. Drake's team argued that public interpretation could transform protected opinion into defamation. The judge's response essentially, no, public ignorance doesn't change protected opinion, was then met by public ignorance insisting otherwise. After the ruling, one of the most viral reactions came from someone who framed the decision as a threat to real victims. Their argument, essentially, I guess you can just run around calling innocent people pedophiles now, think about how this hurts actual survivors, was widely reposted, mostly by people who have historically mocked, dismissed, or vilified victims when those victims are women or when their abusers are celebrities they admire. That contradiction is the tell. It's not empathy, it's opportunism dressed up as morality. When the court dismissed Drake's lawsuit, they reject that judicial outcome, but pretend to side with the victims because it serves their narrative. This isn't actual compassion or concern for victims. It's OVO moral cosplay, invoking victimhood only when it props up their chosen narrative. And their reasoning forms a perfect contradiction. Their first premise, Drake is innocent and a victim because people believe false things about him, is met by their second premise, calling an innocent man a pedophile harms real victims, and that crashes right into the brick wall of judicial reality. The court found that the lyric was opinion, not fact, and that Drake suffered no legal harm, meaning any harm he may have suffered is not under the court's jurisdiction and not something that it has the power to resolve. So, if the law, the one system explicitly empowered to determine harm, found no harm, then what remains is purely performative outrage. OVOs are fighting for a moral injury that the supposed victim himself failed to prove because it was not provable. That's the purest form of willful stupidity, a self reinforcing fantasy where emotion replaces evidence and moral language is weaponized against the truth. Some OVOs spent almost the last year reading the docket, but they weren't reading it to understand it. They read it the way conspiracy theorists read declassified files, not as a source of truth or fact, but as a tool for their own confirmation bias. They'll screenshot one line from a 35-page order, rip it from context, and trumpet it online as proof the judge somehow agrees with them. They'll quote a procedural note or a single phrase and pretend it's a verdict. They aren't reading for comprehension, they're reading to argue. That's not literacy, that's intellectual fraud. This behavior sits halfway between arrogance and delusion. It's arrogant because they presume the authority to interpret legal language they don't understand. And it's delusional because they truly believe those interpretations can somehow overrule the court that issued them. So when they do read, it isn't for enlightenment. They don't want to learn or understand. They just want more ammunition to support their delusion. They skim for whatever sounds vindicating, and anything that doesn't gets discarded as bias or corruption. In the end, cherry picking from the docket doesn't make them informed participants in legal discourse. It makes them active participants in misinformation, cloaked in the performance of research. When the dismissal order dropped, OVOs didn't just reject the outcome, they rejected the judge's grasp of chronology, as if a federal jurist had less command of the record than a fan thread on social media. Across platforms, coordinated accounts claim the judge got the sequence wrong, insisting that Not Like Us didn't directly follow tailor made freestyle and that the judge doesn't understand who provoked whom. In other words, they believe a sitting judge ruling on a case that literally required her to take judicial notice of each song and study them thoroughly somehow lacks the literacy they possess from YouTube compilations. But the judge didn't say Not Like Us came immediately after Tailor Made Freestyle. She said accurately that Drake raised the topic of liking young girls first, and Kendrick's record was a subsequent response. That sequencing is legally relevant because it shows context and mutual participation on the discussion of a single topic. Both were central to her finding that the lyrics were part of a dialogue, not a unilateral, unprovoked attack. To deny that, then, OVOs now claim superior expertise, not just in music chronology, but in judicial reasoning, as if provocation order determines liability. Remember, none of these people factually know what the hell they're talking about, and as such, they willfully misinterpret a rap timeline for a chain of custody of guilt, arguing that if Kendrick started it, Drake simply defended himself from an attack. That's how little they understand about speech law, causation, or artistic exchange. This is arrogance disguised as analysis, the belief that screaming, actually, Your Honor, in a comment section outweighs the hundreds of pages of record the judge reviewed. It's the same delusion that fuels conspiracy thinking everywhere. If the expert disagrees with me, the expert must be wrong. In reality, the judge order reflects not confusion, but absolute comprehension. She fully grasped the sequence, the context, and the conversational nature of the songs. OVOs used their argument to try and cloak their ignorance as expertise, but the judge ruled that public opinion is not expertise. And when the court dismissed Drake's complaint in full, the legal reality was clear. The case is over. Yet online, a new fan fiction is born, pushed by OVO's screaming, he can appeal, therefore he hasn't lost. This is willful stupidity. Denial feeding on itself in an infinite loop. In reality, appeal doesn't equal reversal. Appeal doesn't equal pending victory. Appeal doesn't equal legal limbo. Appeal means you're asking the higher court to review whether the lower court was wrong. And that process begins after you file a notice of appeal, which Drake hasn't, despite what his lawyers have said publicly. Even on the slim chance that the Second Circuit overturns the dismissal, that would not mean the appellate judges believe Drake. It wouldn't even mean he's right. Appeals courts don't retry facts. They review whether the lower court applied the law correctly, and OVOs are in no position to say whether she did or didn't. They aren't experts. They aren't the appeals court. They don't have a crystal ball. If the appellate panel were to send the case back, it would simply mean try again under a different legal standard, not Drake wins. The appellate process is about procedure, not vindication. But to fans who conflate legal nuance with their fan fiction, appeal sounds like rematch, and rematch sounds like redemption. It isn't. It's paperwork, deadlines, and law, none of which care about their feelings or their streaming numbers. But his supporters have recast can appeal into already won. They've willfully mistaken possibility for inevitability, and worse, inevitability for truth. This is no longer simple misunderstanding. It's belief without belief in reality. These men, and let's be clear, it's overwhelmingly grown men, aren't simply uninformed. They're anti-informed. They interpret every boundary of fact as a personal affront they can somehow argue down to a new outcome. They cannot. They don't weigh evidence. They count retweets. They don't respect the difference between knowledge and certainty because they've replaced curiosity with their own willful stupidity. To claim they know better than a judge isn't just laughable, it's downright embarrassing. When anyone literate in procedure explains otherwise, they don't feel corrected, they feel personally attacked, and they respond not with inquiry, but insult. That's performative stupidity, a cultivated refusal to learn because learning means they would have to admit they are wrong. But denying that reality doesn't change the fact that they are wrong. Drake's fans lost their footing with the reality of this case almost a year ago. And now that the outcome contradicts everything they swore would happen, they've turned their confusion into hostility because they never bothered to follow the filings, the rulings, or basic procedure from an objective position. They're angry at anyone who did. They swarm people who actually understand the case, demanding explanations to their satisfaction. But it's a trap, not a genuine conversation. Their questions aren't about learning, they're about fighting reality and the people who can see it. When you answer one, they throw 10 more. What about this? Distractions, because they don't want to understand, they want to be right. It's not education they're after, it's validation. And no one is obligated to indulge that. When someone refuses to argue in circles with them, they cry, "You can't explain it," as if the failure to teach the willfully stupid is proof that they are right. Every era has its fools. Ours just have Wi Fi. What OVOs prove day after day is that ignorance doesn't disappear in the information age, it metastasizes. OVOs will keep performing intelligence for an echo chamber as ignorant as they are. They don't want the truth, they just want confirmation. They're not stupid by accident, they're stupid on purpose. 1 year ago today, Kendrick Lamar's verse, unlike that, forced a nuclear moment in hip hop, one that reignited competition to a place beyond just the cosmetics. In a few calculated bars, he dismantled the narrative of the big three, forced Drake and J. Cole into uncomfortable and compromising positions, and set the stage for one of the most significant rap confrontations of the modern era. A year later, the impact of that verse still reverberates, not just because of its lyrical brilliance, but because of the sheer strategic precision with which it was deployed. For years, mainstream rap discussions revolved around the idea of Kendrick, Drake, and J. Cole as the big three. While fans debated rankings, the industry consensus was that these three were the untouchable leaders of their generation. In one line, Kendrick rejected that entire narrative framework. He refused to be placed in the same tier as Drake and Cole, making it clear that they weren't his peers, they were beneath him. This wasn't just a diss, it was a reorganization of the battlefield and everyone on it. If Like That was a direct provocation for Drake, it was an indirect trap for J. Cole. While Cole had positioned himself as a contender for the king in the Big Three, Kendrick dismissed him with a single line. The mere act of responding to first person shooter quickly proved Cole was mistaken for thinking he was in the same tier. That alone was enough to shake the dynamic. Cole had positioned himself as a friendly rival to both Kendrick and Drake, playing the role of the neutral middleman in the Big Three narrative. Kendrick effectively removed him from the equation by dismissing him so quickly that he wasn't even worth engaging in full. This forced J. Cole into a difficult position. If he responded aggressively, he risked igniting a war with Kendrick that he wasn't prepared for. If he did nothing, he looked like an afterthought in the rap hierarchy. J. Cole's decision to release 7 Minute Drill was a miscalculation. His tone was hesitant, and the track lacked the conviction necessary to challenge Kendrick. Worse, he immediately walked it back, apologizing and removing it from streaming platforms. This played right into Kendrick's hands. He barely had to say another word about Cole. Cole had already eliminated himself. The battle was now exclusively between Kendrick and Drake, with Cole watching from the sidelines. Before Like That, any debate about the best rapper included Drake and Cole. After Like That, the discussion shifted. It was now Kendrick versus Drake, with Cole reduced to collateral damage. Kendrick made this happen with one line. That's not just good rapping, that's elite strategy. While Kendrick's jab at Cole was enough to make waves, the primary target was Drake. The verse had an undercurrent of, "I see you, and I'm coming for you." It was a shot that demanded a response, one that would lead to Euphoria, 616 in LA, Meet the Grams, and Not Like Us. Kendrick's verse wasn't a full diss track, but that was exactly the point. By delivering a calculated jab rather than an all out attack, Kendrick forced Drake into an impossible position. If Drake ignored it, he would look weak, as if he was afraid to engage. If Drake responded, he would enter a battle in a defensive posture and on Kendrick's terms. By striking first, Kendrick dictated the pace of the conflict. This is a classic strategy in warfare. Force your opponent to react rather than allowing them to attack on their own terms. Drake had spent years throwing subliminals at Kendrick, but he had the advantage of doing so at his own convenience. Like That eliminated that comfort. Kendrick's shot was so public and so undeniable that Drake had to respond or look weak. The brilliance of this move became clear as the battle unfolded. Once Drake engaged, Kendrick controlled the pace of the war. From a strategic standpoint, Kendrick's move created urgency and real danger for Drake's public image as a rapper and a power broker. Kendrick's verse didn't just attack Drake's reputation, it attacked his perceived power. Drake built his career on controlling narratives. Drake was always able to dictate the rules of engagement. Like that, shattered that ability. By positioning himself as the aggressor, Kendrick made Drake look defensive. In hip hop, the person chasing the battle is always at a disadvantage. Drake was now forced to prove himself while Kendrick sat back, methodically choosing when to strike. Kendrick's verse on Like That marked the beginning of the end for Drake, not just in the context of their beef, but in the broader sense of his cultural dominance. Before Like That, Drake was seen as untouchable, an artist who had survived every challenge, controlled the industry on his terms, and dictated the pace of any conflict. In a few calculated bars, Kendrick Lamar forced Drake into a position he had never been in before, one where he was no longer the aggressor, but the defender. Drake's historical strategy was classic: throw rocks and hide his hand, baiting Kendrick into a response while maintaining plausible deniability. He wanted to diminish Kendrick's status without ever facing him head on. Like That ended that game, forcing Drake into a battle he could not control. Like That wasn't just a diss verse, it was the moment the pre existing cracks in Drake's persona became too big to ignore. This instantly tilted the power dynamic in Kendrick's favor. Beyond Drake, Like That also disrupted the industry itself. Hip hop had been coasting on a complacent status quo, with the big three narrative maintaining an illusion of equilibrium. With Like That, Kendrick Lamar executed a preemptive strike that leveraged the art of war and game theory to devastating effect, signaling that he was prepared for any counterattack before it even materialized. Sun Tzu stresses the importance of shaping the battlefield before the enemy can, and Kendrick did exactly that. By moving first, he seized the initiative, forcing Drake into a reactive position where his options were already constrained. This was not just an attack, but a calculated forcing move, a concept in game theory where one player makes a move that compels the opponent into a narrow set of responses, all of which lead to disadvantageous positions. Crucially, Like That was not an all out offensive, but a low cost, high reward strategic poke. Yet the impact was disproportionate, creating asymmetrical pressure on Drake. Sun Tzu's principle, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, applies here. Before Kendrick even escalated to Euphoria or Not Like Us, he had already forced Drake into a no win situation where his brand, his ego, and his credibility were all at risk, irrespective of his next move. In iterated game scenarios, an early decisive move establishes a precedent. It signals that escalation will be met with escalation. This was a dominant strategy in that Kendrick pre committed to war while demonstrating an ability to control its tempo. Unlike Pusha T's shock and awe approach in the story of Adidon, Kendrick's attack was layered, designed for sustained attrition rather than a single death blow. The brilliance of Like That was that it set the terms of engagement. Any response from Drake would only deepen his entanglement in a game Kendrick already had strategic control of. Like That wasn't just a verse, it was a power move that cemented Kendrick Lamar as a lyrical assassin, the most war ready, the most calculated, and in a way unique to him alone, the most dangerous rapper of his generation.
I study rap battles for a living.
In rap battles, skill alone doesn't win the war. It's the ability to control the narrative, captivate the audience, and leave your opponent exposed in front of them. That matters just as much as bars and beats. Nearly a month after Kendrick's verse on Like That, where he easily dismissed J. Cole and fixed his sights on Aubrey, Drake dropped Push Ups and Tailor Made Freestyle, the latter of which wound up being a huge miscalculation on his part. Then, 1 year ago today, Kendrick Lamar responded. The goal of a rap battle isn't just to defeat your rival, it's to prove publicly that you're the better artist, thinker, and cultural force. Without the audience's recognition, the takedown doesn't land. Kendrick understood this, and in Euphoria, he weaponized that understanding. Kendrick didn't just diss Drake, he stripped him publicly, line by line, image by image. He laid bare the machinery of Drake's persona, the manipulative charm, the emotional branding, the carefully curated vulnerability. He called Drake a habitual liar, a scam artist, and someone desperate to be black enough. Comments that didn't just sting, but rewired how listeners began to see Drake. Kendrick didn't just insult him, he altered the context through which the audience processes everything Drake does. That is narrative control. Drake's greatest strength has always been his meticulously crafted mainstream public persona, a fusion of charisma, vulnerability, emotional depth, confidence, and control. Control. Oh, yes. It is the cornerstone of his brand, the lens through which fans interpret his music, and the armor that protects him from critique. But that persona is also his only real weapon in rap conflict. Drake rarely wins battles through raw aggression or lyrical destruction. He wins by controlling the narrative of his persona, leaning on his image as untouchable, witty, and emotionally in command. And it had worked up until this point, but in reality and in war, this makes Drake uniquely vulnerable. Because if his persona is compromised, whether by his own missteps or a calculated attack, it destabilizes his entire strategy. A diss from Drake that fails to protect or enhance his image backfires, making him look petty, dishonest, or weak. A successful attack from an opponent like Kendrick doesn't just land as a lyrical insult, it chips away at the myth of Drake. And Euphoria does exactly that. Kendrick doesn't engage Drake as just another rapper, he exposes Drake's persona as an illusion. By labeling him a manipulator, a liar, and insecure in his identity, Kendrick fractures the protective image Drake relies on. Once that mask is cracked, every subsequent diss, 616 in LA, Meet the Grams, and Not Like Us, hits deeper. Kendrick's genius lies in this setup. By wounding Drake's image in the minds of listeners early and publicly, he makes future blows exponentially more effective. Drake's ego, disguised as poise, is part of that persona. Once Kendrick shatters it, Drake is left without defense. His responses come off reactive, insecure, or miscalculated, not powerful. When your only shield is your image, and that image is being dismantled in front of millions, every attack becomes worse. Kendrick Lamar understood that and exploited it masterfully. Euphoria signaled that Kendrick would dictate the terms of engagement. Even the title was a powerful move. It references, of course, the HBO show Euphoria, on which Drake is an executive producer, cheekily flipping a piece of Drake's Hollywood clout into a diss. This intertextual jab set a tone. Kendrick would use Drake's own affiliations and comfort zones against him. Lyrically, Euphoria was a direct response to Drake's initial disses. It answered push-ups and Drake's tailor-made freestyle, point for point. Drake had boasted of his dominance, calling out Kendrick on first-person shooter with J. Cole, and in response, Kendrick opened Euphoria by stripping away Drake's credibility and honesty. He explicitly calls Drake a master manipulator and habitual liar, signaling that everything coming from Drake, whether about his success, lifestyle, or beefs, is not to be trusted. It's a psychological play against Drake and anyone that listens to his music, and in this case, his diss tracks attacking Kendrick. Kendrick even brought up the one opponent Drake famously never beat, Pusha T. By invoking that unresolved humiliation, Kendrick undercut Drake's previous diss before Drake could even build momentum. You couldn't handle Pusha. Why do you think you can handle me? It's another psychological blow aimed to reopen an old wound in Drake's psyche. Kendrick labels Drake a fraud with lines like calling him a scam artist and a liar. He implies Drake's record-breaking success is built on selling out, pandering to the masses with formulaic hits, a direct attack on Drake's artistic integrity and credibility as a hip-hop artist. In a cutting line, Kendrick raps, "I got a son to raise, but I can see you don't know nothing about that." This strikes at Drake's manhood and responsibility. By essentially calling Drake a deadbeat dad, Kendrick undermines Drake's image as a loving father, an image Drake had only recently begun to cultivate publicly, and paints him as immature and irresponsible. Kendrick pointedly questions Drake's confidence in his own Black identity, given how often he works with or exploits Black artists and the fact that he isn't a Black American. He taunts Drake, calling him out for overcompensating and being performative and exploitative. How many more Black features till you finally feel like you're Black enough? It's a direct challenge to Drake's authenticity in the Black community and in hip hop culture, which is blackety black, 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 black. It is implying Drake is insecure about or lacking in his cultural roots. And by referencing Drake's role in Euphoria and his tendency to be emotional, Kendrick subtly jabs at Drake's longtime image of being the emo, heartfelt rapper with an undercurrent of public rumor and speculation about Drake's behavior towards young women. And through Euphoria, Kendrick's humor is also on display, like a cat batting at a mouse before he kills it and walks away. While Drake's disses were serious, Kendrick's clever mockery painted Drake as laughable. This erodes Drake's relationship with the audience by making him the butt of the joke. Kendrick's strategy in Euphoria was to seize narrative control and hit Drake from unexpected angles. By dropping the track unannounced, he caught Drake and the world off guard, immediately dominating the conversation to elevate the diss into a pop culture event. Kendrick blended scathing direct insults with layered wordplay and double entendres. This balance of direct and indirect insult kept Drake guessing and listeners engaged in dissecting the song, amplifying its impact on Drake and the battle. Importantly, Kendrick was already thinking steps ahead during Euphoria. He actually foreshadows that more is coming by referencing Drake's own famous diss track, Back to Back. This serves as a warning that chilled spines and dropped jaws when those who know heard it. Imagine how Drake felt. By delivering Euphoria as a direct yet layered and introspective performance, Kendrick positioned himself as the more honest artist, the one speaking from clarity, not illusion. He didn't hide behind subliminals or internet antics. He called Drake out plainly, inviting the world to examine the emperor with no clothes. The brilliance of this move is that Kendrick didn't need to win the argument outright in that moment. He simply needed to shift the lens, to plant doubt in the public's mind about who Drake really is. In hip hop, the real battle is perception. If fans no longer believe in the mythology an artist has built, their power dies. Euphoria wasn't just a diss track, it was a public unmasking. Kendrick put Drake on trial in front of the culture, made the crowd the jury, and confidently walked away, knowing that the verdict on Euphoria and this round of the battle would fall in his favor. Persona is everything. It's not just how an artist raps, it's how they exist. Persona shapes how lyrics land, how fans connect, and how rivals perceive strength or vulnerability. In a genre built on bravado, authenticity, dominance, and narrative control, your image is your weapon, your shield, and your currency. When that persona is airtight, even weak bars can feel powerful. A year later, Euphoria stands as the moment Drake's armor cracked, clean, deep, and irreversible. While it wasn't the final blow in the Kendrick versus Drake saga, it was the moment the tide turned. More than a diss track, Euphoria was a surgical stripping that reframed Drake's entire persona in the eyes of the public. Kendrick didn't just attack, he revealed. And in hindsight, that might have been the most devastating tactic of all. At the time, Drake didn't seem shaken. He fired back quickly, mocked Kendrick's flow, stayed active online, and played it cool. But that's the genius of euphoria. It didn't demand an immediate collapse, it planted something inescapable: doubt. Euphoria was the psychological x ray. That's why so many still consider Euphoria the most impactful Kendrick diss. It showed everyone that behind Drake's bravado was a man vulnerable to exposure. And that exposure, if not addressed, would be fatal. In hindsight, Euphoria was that blow. Drake didn't fall right away, but he never recovered either. He slowly bled through every response, every play to regain control. Kendrick knew it then. Most people see it now. A year later, Euphoria isn't just a fan favorite, it's a turning point. The moment Drake began to lose. Diss tracks don't just sound better, they hurt more because the armor that once protected you is gone. It's not just about losing a battle, it's about watching an empire of influence, confidence, and public favor slowly erode. For artists like Drake, whose dominance hinges on a carefully sustained persona in mainstream media, a well placed strike can trigger a domino effect. And in hip hop, that's not just damage, it's foreshadowing. The strategy of 616 in LA is simple: create paranoia in the mind of your target and let the resulting chaos work for you. So, if like that cleared the battlefield and Euphoria stripped the armor, then 616 in LA is Kendrick planting a psychological landmine. It's a strategy of escalation, each move designed to leave Drake with fewer options and more pressure. Drake's timestamp tracks are literal moments in time. They act as sonic journal entries. This is where I was mentally and physically at this exact time and place. He uses them to flex lyricism, address tensions, and reflect, all while rooting the content in a real world timestamp. Kendrick's 616 in LA, though, isn't literal, or if it is, we don't know the story. It's more like a coded message. We don't get a narrative of what happened at 616 in LA. Instead, Kendrick loads the title with potential meanings, each possibility a shot across the bow at Drake, whether it's tying it to Tupac, Father's Day, or biblical damnation. The ambiguity invites interpretation, making it a kind of cultural riddle. So when Drake says, "This is my state of mind at 9 a.m. in Dallas," Kendrick says, "You figure out why I chose this time and how many ways it can hurt you." It's a battle of styles: Drake's formula versus Kendrick's abstract weaponry. Kendrick flipped the timestamp format from literal to symbolic warfare, turning a personal signature into a public diss. Symbolic timestamping twists Drake's iconic move on its head. If Drake uses timestamps for control and clarity, Kendrick uses them for ambiguity and menace. This is Kendrick saying, "You don't even know where the threat is coming from." With references like Tupac, Father's Day, biblical sins, assassinations, etc., he's aligning himself with deeper moral, historical, and cultural archetypes. It's no longer just a rap beef. It's a question of who stands on the side of legacy, fatherhood, and righteousness. Drake is being judged on multiple levels. Kendrick weaponizes the idea that Drake's inner circle may not be loyal. He implies betrayal within OVO, people possibly feeding information to the opposition. And he does it without naming names, letting suspicion do the damage. Drake now has to wonder who around him is leaking, who's slipping. That anxiety is corrosive, especially in a public, high profile battle. Pair that with Kendrick's calm, detached tone, and it becomes even more unsettling. He's not emotional, he's tactical. This complements the broader narrative Kendrick has been crafting. Like that is loud and clear. Draw your sword. Euphoria strips away Drake's curated image. Leave your armor. 616 in LA isolates and destabilizes. Don't trust your men. It's Kendrick turning the pressure up by making Drake look over his shoulder, not just respond to him with lyrics. The content reads like an intelligence leak. Kendrick suggests that there are cracks in OVO, that information is slipping from the inside, that Drake can't fully trust his people. But he doesn't really offer proof, he just whispers doubt and lets it spread. He tells Drake who it's not, but doesn't ever directly tell him who it is. It's not just a diss, it's an infection. Everyone hears it and starts looking sideways. That ambiguity becomes the point. It pulls fans and critics into the same headspace of overthinking and suspicion that he wants Drake trapped in. The audience starts playing detective. Reddit threads, genius annotations, think pieces, they all become a part of the psyops. Kendrick doesn't give you the answer, he lets the questions drive you. The beat is eerie, minimal, low tempo. It doesn't snap, it creeps. That absence of dramatic flair is disarming. It tells you, I'm not trying to entertain, I'm delivering a message you're not ready for. That's Kendrick stepping into the role of reluctant executioner. He's not coming in gleeful or vindictive. He's burdened by what he knows he's about to do. But here's the power move. The vulnerability is strategic. It shows humanity, but it doesn't cost him anything. If anything, it adds gravity. Kendrick's not confessing out of weakness, he's confessing out of clarity. Kendrick shows his inner conflict to reveal his moral compass. That moment makes everything that follows feel heavier. The paranoia, the cryptic messaging, the cold tone, all of it lands harder because we saw the last flicker of hesitation before he locked in. With the words, God, my confession is yours, Kendrick steps into an archetype rarely used in rap battles, the warrior with a conscience. It echoes mythic storytelling structures where the hero doesn't seek conflict, but doesn't run from it either. He is called and he answers. That reluctant tone casts everything that follows in a tragic light, elevating the beef from mere competition to something closer to fated confrontation. This isn't, I'm better than you. It's, I have no fucking choice but to destroy you. I know what I just did. I know what I'm about to do. And I'm ready to do what comes after this. He gives you just enough vulnerability to show he's human, but not enough to lose control of the frame. This level of composure adds to his legend. He's already made peace with what must be done. That quiet resolve is intimidating because it signals he's not even worried about winning the battle because he's already accepted the cost of war. You feel the weight of what's still to come. He doesn't bluff. That creates suspense in the audience and anxiety in the target. He's telling Drake and the world, if I'm this composed while dismantling you quietly, imagine what happens when I raise my voice. That emotional arc from spiritual struggle to cold execution cements Kendrick's role in this battle, not just as a rapper, but as the one playing the long game. We also get a subtle but chilling foreshadowing of just how deep Kendrick is willing to go. That Drake isn't safe, OVO isn't safe, the very legacy of his family is not safe. Musically, 616 in LA samples an Al Green song featuring Drake's uncle on guitar. This sample choice is another subtle mind game. It's Kendrick saying, even your family legacy is mine. For fans, it confirmed that Kendrick wasn't just responding, he was orchestrating. Kendrick had stepped fully into his world and beat him at it with one song. Kendrick took Drake's own tools, stripped them of their power, and rebranded them in his image. The effect? It made Drake look predictable and worse, outmatched on his own turf in a battle he provoked. A year later, that's part of the lingering sting. Drake didn't just lose the war, he lost this particular round of the battle in a space he once defined and controlled. 616 is a masterclass. Kendrick took control of Drake's OVO brand persona, which he would throttle like a pinata 2 tracks later, and left suspicion in his wake, an issue Drake still struggles with today, either directly or through the constant hum of whispers by music listeners. For rap, 616 in LA signaled a return to pure, calculated lyricism. It was the sound of one MC stripping the flash from the moment and focusing entirely on craft and dominance. It's what made the beef feel serious again, not just fun. And in that, 616 shifted the tone of the battle. Looking back, 616 in LA proved Kendrick wasn't just in control, he was designing the blueprint. It was the point where Drake stopped reacting as the leader of a battalion and started reacting as a man being led down the mountain as a prisoner of war. Two words set the internet on fire. Two words made people stop the song and run laps, get a drink, call a friend for support, walk out of the room, and scream in sheer horror. Meet the Grams is culturally coded. It's intentionally disrespectful. The call is coming from inside the house type vibes. Kendrick is in the compound. He's in the embassy. He's in the baby's room, standing over the toddler bed. He pulls an envelope from his pocket, opens it, unfolds the paper within, and begins to read. The words Dear Adonis are genuinely shocking when you hear them for the first, or the 10th, or the 100th time. Meet the Grams is a generational reckoning in 4 verses aimed at destroying the layers of Aubrey Graham's public image by targeting the people most associated with his legacy: his son, his parents, his alleged daughter, and finally, himself. No one is spared. This is Mr. Morale wielding the blade. What unfolds over the next few minutes is true horror in audio form as Kendrick moves easily within the embassy from room to room, locating each victim with fluid precision. One of the most devastating choices on Meet the Grams was to speak to Drake's family, not about them. He was in their personal space, direct and uncensored. That formal choice gave the track an uncomfortable intimacy, making it impossible to brush off as just talk. Each address functions like an indictment, not just of the man, but also the people responsible for him and the children who will inherit whatever is left. This is where Kendrick's vision becomes existential. This isn't about humiliation, it's about disinheritance. He's declaring that Drake's lineage no longer qualifies as valid under his leadership, that the structure Drake built on fake vulnerability, high polished branding, and emotional ambiguity has reached its moral limit. Drake built an entire chapter of his public image on being a father and making up for his own father's shortcomings, learning on the fly, growing into it. But what Kendrick does is take that very narrative and turn it inside out. because he is a father and a son, too. Drake's house doesn't fall on its own. It's condemned by someone who claims the position of higher authority. What remains is the sound of legacy being revoked and the idea that what Drake created can't be passed down, not because the industry won't let it, but because the culture shouldn't. It's not safe to inherit. This is what makes Meet the Grams feel final in its moral clarity. Sometimes, to save the children of the damned have to die. Kendrick is issuing a cultural writ of indictment. He's naming names. He's severing lineage. He's telling the world this isn't just about a rapper. This is about rot passed down and covered up for decades. The first verse is merciless. Kendrick defines what kind of a man a Black boy should grow up to be, and he's saying unequivocally, not like Drake. Please remember, you could be a bitch even if you got bitches. That one bar undoes years of Drake's performance of masculinity, exposing it as shallow, purchased, and performative. Kendrick is rewriting the blueprint Adonis is supposed to follow. Be proud of who you are. Your strength come from within. A lot of superstars, that's real, but your daddy ain't one of them. And you nothing like him. You'll carry yourself as king. Can't understand me right now? Just play this when you're 18. Kendrick openly tells another man's son, my music will be here whenever you're ready, and so will I. And with that, he slips out of the baby's room and down the hall to his next set of victims, Drake's parents, the source of the rot. Sandra and Dennis are cast not as collateral victims, but as enablers. Kendrick names them and says what few would dare. You raised this man. You should be held accountable. In addressing Drake's parents by their first names, Kendrick does something that would normally be considered unacceptable and disrespectful in the Black community. You don't call someone else's parents by their first name, no matter how old you are. Kendrick completely disregards their familial titles in favor of an eye-to-eye dressing down of Sandra and Dennis. Drake isn't just problematic, he's a danger. Kendrick accuses him of surrounding himself with predators, exploiting women, and doing so under the veil of celebrity and the protection of his parents. Verse 3 shifts to a daughter Drake allegedly has hidden. Whether metaphor or reality, it doesn't matter. Kendrick understands the cultural power of invocation. Then comes the final verse, addressed directly to Aubrey, who was so distracted by dropping family matters, he didn't realize Kendrick was standing right behind him. The verse is scorn. He confronts Drake with a terrifying calm, addictions, lies, identity confusion, and failed masculinity. He catalogs every deception and contradiction that underpins the Drake brand. He even offers advice, and then the calm shifts into something else. You lied, you lied, you lied. The repetition becomes a ritual. This is Kendrick delivering a public reckoning, a courtroom closing statement, and a eulogy. Meet the Grams wasn't catchy and it wasn't built for TikTok. Hell, some people only listened to it once and that was enough.
Oh, no, no. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
But even if you threw holy water at it and hoped that would do the trick, it metastasized. For Kendrick, Meet the Grams was a risk. It veered from hip hop combat into personal annihilation. It wasn't built for consumption, it was built for confrontation. Kendrick had crossed into a space where art, truth, and vengeance merged. He didn't engage with Drake the artist, he engaged with Aubrey the man. In strategic terms, Meet the Grams operates at a level far beyond the typical rap battle. This is doctrine-level warfare. Kendrick is applying the core tenets of information warfare, myth dismantling, and legacy targeting to devastating effect. Euphoria planted the seeds of doubt, slowly dismantling Drake's persona in a way that made listeners question what they thought they knew. By the time Meet the Grams arrived, those seeds had taken root. The audience was no longer wondering if Kendrick had a point. They were ready to hear the full indictment. This was about truth, protection, lineage, and legacy. Kendrick clarified that the stakes were not ego or clout, but cultural and generational. He built a new lens through which the public now sees Drake, shaped by paternal failure, moral vacancy, and cultural detachment. It's not something Drake can walk back. This reframing of identity sticks because it seemingly confirms what people already suspected was true. Through it all, Kendrick positioned himself as the culture's moral compass. He wasn't simply a better rapper, he was the protector, the judge, the exorcist, the executioner. He framed Drake as a threat, a cultural contaminant who had profited from Blackness without honoring its roots, and who, when confronted, revealed nothing but emptiness. In hip hop, legacy is everything. It's what artists fight for when the charts fade, when the fame cools, when the audience shifts. Legacy is supposed to outlive the moment. It's what you pass on through your music, influence, and your name. But legacy can be dangerous when built on performance without principle and confession without consequence. And Kendrick saw the danger in the way Drake's contradictions had been normalized, in the way his exploitation, appropriations, and casual harm had been protected by charm, spectacle, metrics, and the people around him. That kind of legacy, Kendrick argued, didn't deserve to continue. So he ended it. Meet the Grams was a reckoning, a statement that Drake's crown had become meaningless and that hip hop, if it was to survive as sacred and powerful, had to let him go. And that's how you end a war. That is why it hit differently. Kendrick narrated Drake's life as a cautionary tale. He reframed him not as an opponent to be feared, but as a generational curse to be broken. It was a brutal lyrical takedown, the likes of which we've never heard before and will likely never hear again. To be indigenous to Black culture is to be born into rituals, codes, music, mourning, joy. It's to inherit resilience and improvisation. When Kendrick Lamar says the words, they not like us, he's invoking a sacred circle. He's defining Blackness as history carried in the body, pain turned into rhythm, and joy that resists commodification. Kendrick was defending something sacred, a cultural legacy that gets borrowed, flattened, and monetized, while the people who built it are still fighting to survive the systems that made its creation essential to our survival. And when Kendrick declares they not like us, he's also saying, we are something and we matter. It's a collective affirmation. That line isn't exclusion for exclusion's sake, it's reclamation. It draws the circle back around the people who built the culture with sweat, blood, and bars. So, this is more than a beef. For Black people in the diaspora, genealogy isn't just about ancestry, it's about return. It's about reclaiming what was deliberately stolen: names, language, rituals, migrations, stories. The Atlantic didn't just scatter bodies, it scattered lineages. It ripped apart the living and buried the archives. So when we talk about genealogy, we're talking about putting the bones of our collective but dismembered body back together. We've been told to forget. We've been forced to assimilate. We've been taught to measure ourselves against standards that were never made for us. This is why Black artists, thinkers, griots, historians, and healers constantly return to lineage. From Zora Neale Hurston to Octavia Butler, from Beyonce's Lemonade to Kendrick's The Heart Part 6. The call is always the same. Remember who you are and where you come from. Own your narrative, because if we don't, the world will define us in ways that erase our agency, our complexity, and our divinity. Erasure is not just historical, it's present. It's in who gets platformed, who gets archived, whose pain is seen as real, whose brilliance gets footnoted or stolen. It's in the way blackness gets commodified, turned into aesthetic, stripped of context, while Black people remain disposable. So when we talk about Black music, we're talking about survival, about telling our own stories, mapping our own bloodlines, naming our ancestors, and refusing to let the archive end in slavery. What if we framed Black music and rap in particular as recovery, as science, as ceremony? Because every time we say their names, every time we trace a route back to its soil, we disrupt the lie that we were meant to disappear, or that anyone can don blackface and somehow be imbued with our abilities. Kendrick has been containing this energy for years. That's what made it so terrifying when he finally let it out. He didn't have to shift into this mode. He's always had this in him: the conviction, the grit, the precision. He's been holding the weight of the culture on his back while half the industry was busy chasing trends. What they called a side of Kendrick we've never seen was a side he's kept locked away until it was time. Meet the Grams made people clutch pearls and pray a rebuking prayer to protect themselves from what they were hearing. But apparently, it wasn't enough. Not for Kendrick Lamar. Nope. When Drake claimed that Kendrick beats his fiancée and that Kendrick's son is in fact not his, millions of people sighed. A deep sigh, a Black ancestral sigh. They held their heads in their hands. They looked to the sky, to the ceiling, to God, to a friend, to the tops of their shoes, because they knew, we knew, I knew. Turns out that if you take it there, I'm taking it further, was a promise. War and death, even when metaphorical, are exhausting. May 4th, 2024 was supposed to be a day to rest, to reflect, to work through the dis-ease left by Meet the Grams, to process the sequence of events that brought us to that point. It was clear as glass that Drake had lost the battle and the war, and that if he even tried to resurrect himself, Kendrick would drop something so devastating, we'd collectively hide under the covers to wait it out. By the time Not Like Us landed, the damage had been done. Like that forced Drake to engage. Euphoria shattered the mirror. 616 in LA broke the trust. Meet the Grams ended the bloodline. So what's left after the funeral? A parade. You can dance to it. You can run laps to it. You can chant it with thousands of people at a concert. But what you're actually chanting is exile. Kendrick didn't have to prove Drake was guilty. He gave the people a way to remember it together. Kendrick doesn't need to convince the audience, he activates them. They Not Like Us is indoctrination. Kendrick strips the proximity, severs the access, and leaves Drake stranded. The repetition of the hook becomes a spell, a password, a declaration of community. We're real, you're not. And in hip hop, that's a sentence worse than irrelevance. Not Like Us is a diss track shaped like a public health announcement. It's containment. Kendrick treats Drake less like a rival and more like a biohazard. He's trying to ensure the culture doesn't get infected. Then comes the final blow: laughter. What OVO for? The other vaginal option? Pussy. It's so juvenile, so absurd. It shouldn't work, but it does. Because by this point, Drake isn't being seen as a serious threat. He's a punchline, a meme, a clown in a booth of velvet and mirrors. That's the trap Kendrick sets. You can respond to a bar. You can't respond to humiliation. Once you've become the joke, it's over. This is Kendrick leading the parade and daring anyone to act like they didn't see what he just did. And the culture? They marched with him. You run to Atlanta when you need a few dollars? No, you're not a colleague. You a fucking colonizer. On the surface, it reads like a sharp accusation of cultural theft, and it is. But there's more happening here. Kendrick isn't offering a cheap insult, he's delivering a diagnosis. He's not calling Drake a thief of style, he's calling him something more dangerous: an outsider who treats Black American culture as a buffet to sample from, rather than a home to protect. Some interpreted the line as a critique of Drake's biracial identity, as if Kendrick were policing blackness through bloodlines. That interpretation misses the mark entirely. This isn't about ethnicity, it's about geography, immersion, and lived experience. Kendrick isn't questioning whether Drake is black. He's questioning whether Drake has lived the kind of black life that birthed hip hop, the kind of life that carries trauma and love in its DNA and memory in its rhythm. In Kendrick's world and in the history of rap, blackness in America isn't something you claim, it's something you carry. It is tied to neighborhoods shaped by redlining, schools gutted by underfunding, grandmothers who marched, fathers who were locked up, cousins who didn't make it past 25. Hip hop is the sound of surviving those structures and pushing back with poetry. It is not a sound you adopt for profit. It is not a costume for the rollout. It is not a filter you apply when marketing to a target audience. Drake's father may be black and American, but that's not where Drake was raised. He grew up far removed from the American conditions that created artists like Kendrick. That context matters because while Drake has always emphasized his versatility and his ability to move between sounds, scenes, and slang, Kendrick is asking the deeper question: at what cost? This is why Kendrick doesn't call Drake an imitator or a culture vulture. He uses a heavier word: colonizer. Because colonization isn't about flattery, it's about extraction. It's about entering a land that is not yours, benefiting from the labor and brilliance of its people, and walking away with the spoils without ever absorbing the risk, the weight, or the consequences. Hip hop carries memory, blood, and sacrifice. It was built by people who had nothing and made music out of that hunger. To treat it like a costume is to disrespect its purpose. To treat it like a marketing tool is to cheapen its origin. Kendrick isn't gatekeeping for the sake of power. He is safeguarding something sacred. And when he calls Drake a colonizer, he's not taking a personal shot. He's pulling the fire alarm. Kendrick says out loud what people have been whispering for years, taking the volume knob on years of online suspicion and cranking it until the walls shake. Say, Drake, I hear you like him young. He uses the power of art to collapse plausible deniability. There's no need to analyze tone or parse intent. Kendrick makes it clear. This is predator energy, and it doesn't just live in Drake's orbit, it flourishes in it. That's what makes the line certified lover boy, certified pedophiles so devastating. It's a flat statement. Kendrick flips a brand into a sentence, and the crowd repeats it. This was a public service announcement wrapped in beats and bounce. Kendrick didn't invite debate, he demanded awareness. He pulled the curtain back and locked the spotlight in place. Because in Kendrick's world, art has a responsibility to tell the truth when others have grown too comfortable letting silence do the work for them. Kendrick made sure this truth, as he wrote it and delivered it, couldn't be ignored. It felt like Kendrick had hit a switch the culture had been sitting beside for years, waiting, and once it flipped, there was no turning it off. People like to say, beef is good for hip hop, that competition sharpens the blade. But what Kendrick did wasn't only about competition, it was about protecting the soul of a genre that too often mistakes volume for substance and proximity for authenticity. Kendrick put a spotlight on the fact that Black American identity is not universal, even within the diaspora. It's specific. It's rooted in a distinct history: chattel slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, mass incarceration, the Black church, hip hop, jazz, funk, gospel, gang culture, the Black Panthers, HBCUs, the Great Migration, the blues, soul food, Sunday service, MLK and Malcolm, Harriet and Huey. It's cultural DNA born from surviving white supremacy on stolen land, land where your body was once property and your name was someone else's. So when Kendrick says Drake isn't like us, it's not a purity test. Being Black American isn't just about genetics. It's about growing up in a country where your body carries ancestral memory. That's what Kendrick is protecting. That's what "they not like us" means. It's not about elitism, it's about preservation. Black people are connected, yes, but we're not interchangeable. There are different Black experiences, different struggles, different enemies, different joys. And there is power in naming that difference without apology. Because until it is honored, Black Americans will continue to be extracted from, mined for style, slang, and sound, without recognition for what was survived to create it. So, yeah, lineage matters, geography matters, lived experience matters. You don't get to claim the house if you've never survived the fire. So, who is paying for the botting? Who knows? But Nikki isn't the owner of this plantation. She's just a tool for the master, a common variety, useful garden hoe, if you will. Nicki Minaj has become a megaphone for right wing messaging, and the applause machine around her just got exposed. Over the past year, Nicki Minaj's political posts have echoed conservative talking points with increasing intensity, including support for measures like the SAVE Act and culture war narratives around gender and religion. The shift hasn't been subtle, it's been loud, confrontational, designed for virality. And it looked massively supported. You scroll her political posts from late 2025, and you'll see walls of praise. Brave, truth teller, God bless you. They're scared of you. The impression is unmistakable. A cultural titan stepping into politics with an energized, mobilized base at her back. Social media doesn't just distribute ideas, it stages legitimacy. Most users don't audit authenticity, they read the room. If the room looks overwhelmingly supportive, that shifts perception. Criticism feels isolated, alignment feels popular, momentum feels real. This is how propaganda functions in the modern era, not necessarily by fabricating facts, but by saturating the atmosphere around a message until dissent looks fringe. Repetition creates familiarity. Familiarity creates credibility. The illusion of support can generate actual support. This week, Politico published a report by a company called Cyabra. The report says that during a roughly 6-week stretch at the end of 2025, a coordinated network of fake accounts significantly boosted the political posts on Nicki Minaj's X account. And it categorizes Nicki's political social media posts as a campaign, one specifically designed to bolster her as a credible political voice. Out of more than 55,000 profiles that engaged with 51 of her political posts, about 1 in 3 were fake, which is far higher than what you'd normally expect on social media. These accounts didn't just randomly comment, they posted in synchronized bursts, reused the same praise heavy language, interacted with each other to inflate visibility, and embedded themselves in real conversations to make the support look organic. On at least one day, fake accounts made up more than half of all the comments on Nikki's political posts. The report argues that the goal wasn't really about pushing specific policies, but about reinforcing Nicki Minaj's image and manufacturing the appearance of broad, enthusiastic public backing for her recent political messaging. When a celebrity with tens of millions of followers pushes highly partisan narratives, that's already influential. But when that influence is padded with synthetic applause, the effect is compounding. Journalists scanning engagement see a groundswell. Political actors see cultural capital. Fence sitters see safety in numbers. The bots don't vote, but the perception they create can move voters. That is atmosphere construction, and atmosphere shapes belief. Again, most users don't audit authenticity. They read the room. And if the room looks packed with support, support feels normal, safe. It feels popular. The illusion of consensus becomes social proof. Social proof becomes legitimacy. Legitimacy becomes influence. That is how propaganda works in the modern era, not always by inventing lies, but by manufacturing momentum. The report doesn't measure belief change, but it absolutely shows that perception dynamics shift around Nikki's posts, specifically the visible perception of support. There's a difference between did people change their political beliefs because of this, and did the public facing optics of Nikki's political legitimacy change? The report's success metrics is about optics, not ideology. If fake accounts increased total engagement numbers, dominated comment sections on certain days, interacted with real users, boosted supportive comments into higher visibility tiers, then what changes is the perceived social consensus around Nicki Minaj and what she posts. Think of it like this: beliefs are deep architecture, perception is surface lighting. The campaign, as described, manipulated the lighting. Social media does not operate on careful deliberation. It operates on perceived consensus. When users scroll through a feed and see overwhelming praise, repeated language framing someone as brave, truth telling, courageous, or persecuted for speaking out, something psychological happens. Familiarity increases the credibility. Repetition breeds perceived truth. What begins as artificial support can convert into real perception shifts. The illusion of consensus can create consensus. And this isn't abstract theory. This is a well-documented cognitive phenomenon. When people encounter the same message repeatedly, especially in environments that appear socially validated, they are more likely to accept it as legitimate truth. The impact is not limited to clicks and likes. It shapes the narrative terrain. That is why botting of this nature is not trivial Barb's fandom behavior. Bots become a form of information manipulation. Nicki Minaj's political pivot did not occur in a vacuum. It arrived at a moment of heightened polarization, cultural war escalation, and digital distrust. And in that environment, amplification is not neutral, it is strategic. If a network of fake accounts worked to frame her as a persecuted truth teller aligned with conservative causes, then that framing was not accidental noise. It was an engineered signal. And now the engineering has been exposed. The conversation shifts again. The question is no longer simply what she is saying, it is how the ecosystem around her messaging has been manipulated. So who is paying for the botting? Who knows? But Nikki isn't the owner of this plantation. She's just a tool for the master, a common variety, useful garden hoe, if you will. The deeper threat here isn't about one rapper. It's about normalization. If synthetic engagement can reliably simulate public enthusiasm, then any political message can be dressed up as a movement. Visibility becomes purchasable. Legitimacy becomes programmable. Reality becomes negotiable. We are no longer debating ideas on equal footing. We are being manipulated. So when people dismiss botting as harmless internet noise, they miss the point. The danger isn't the bot themselves. It's the cascade effect. The way artificial applause can create real applause. The way manufactured momentum can spill into real world political action. If the cheering section is fake, but the cameras capture it anyway, the impact on the audience is very real and very dangerous. What's the Dirt is a YouTuber who gained a lot of attention for his videos covering the Drake-Kendrick rap beef. Things seemed to be going relatively well for him. He found his lane, his audience, and a comfortable rhythm. But like so many white commentators who build their platforms on Black culture without having any real connection to it, he fumbled the bag in the most predictable way possible. In layman's terms, he started talking out the side of his neck about the music, the artists, and the culture. His commentary, wrong-headed, ridiculous, and racist, wasn't just misinformed, it was deeply entitled. Instead of engaging with Black culture from a place of respect or understanding, he treated it as something he could define, control, and dictate terms to, like so many white people before him. When Justin Hunt, a respected hip hop journalist and commentator, gently called him in, offering him an opportunity to self correct and acknowledge the responsibilities that come with being a white man speaking on Black art and culture, What's the Dirt chose violence. Instead of reflecting, he doubled down. He attacked Justin with more shallow, racist, clickbaiting behavior using live streams, social media posts, and more videos to escalate his tantrum. But as the saying goes, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. The fuck around portion of his journey led him swiftly into the find out phase. When the inevitable backlash came, What's the Dirt tried to backpedal, posting an apology. But like a true coward who realized that an apology wouldn't erase his harm, he erased it. That should have been the moment to pause, reassess, and change course. Instead, he did the opposite. He went further down the rabbit hole, continuing to post videos full of piss takes, racial baiting, and incendiary nonsense aimed at Black content creators and figures in the culture. Then, a few months ago, word got around that What's the Dirt planned to make a video targeting the YouTuber Deleted. This wasn't just another bad take. He was allegedly planning to dox Deleted, exposing private and identifying information, all while spinning wild accusations that Deleted was either a white man or another YouTuber entirely, or both. It was an escalation from typical parasocial fixation into outright harassment. At this point, What's the Dirt wasn't just a YouTuber with bad opinions. He was a white man who had become obsessed with Black creators, particularly Black male creators, in a way that went far beyond critique. He was acting as if he had a right to them, their personal lives, their content, their identities. After already getting shoved back to the Stone Age from whence he came by Justin Hunt, What's the Dusty then got packed out repeatedly by Deleted and several other prominent Black YouTubers over a period of months. And yet, instead of taking his L's and moving on, he kept talking about Black YouTubers he has no relationship to whatsoever. This isn't surprising. Obsessive fixation on Blackness is a deeply ingrained pattern. After all, What's the Dirt is a white man from Newfoundland, a province where, as an aside, the indigenous population was erased hundreds of years ago by white settlers. This historical context is relevant because it mirrors a longstanding white pathology, a compulsion to consume, control, absorb, and erase cultures they feel both threatened by and dependent on. What's the Dirt is far from the first non Black person to develop an unnatural fixation on Black people. His behavior falls into a historical continuum, one directly tied to colonization, chattel slavery, cultural appropriation, and racial voyeurism. But in the digital age, this centuries old pattern has adapted to new platforms, and white figures like What's the Dirt have found ways to turn their fixation into content and, more importantly, into profit. What we're seeing here isn't just casual racism or an edgy content strategy. It's a racialized, homoparasocial addiction. He can't not talk about Black people. The people he claims to despise, mock, or expose are the same people who keep his channel afloat. And because he has no real proximity to or relationship with Blackness, the only way he can engage with it is through voyeurism, antagonism, and surveillance. This is a pattern, not an isolated case. White people have long positioned themselves as authorities over Black culture, whether it be academics who build their careers on Black studies while erasing Black scholars, or commentators who claim expertise in hip hop while actively disrespecting its origins and gatekeepers. What's the Dirt is following this tradition, repackaging his anti Black fixation as critique while making money off of it. And that's the key part. He's monetizing his obsession. This isn't just some personal quirk, it's his entire business model. There's an entire industry built on trashing Blackness for white audiences who don't know any better. Whether it's white rappers dissing hip hop while profiting off of it, media personalities making careers out of attacking Black athletes, or right wing commentators stirring up moral panic about Black culture. The formula is the same. Center Blackness in your content, position yourself as an authority, critique, surveil, and attack Black creators. Profit off the rage and engagement, whether from fans or critics. What's the Dirt isn't unique. He's just another cog in this machine. His audience, mostly young males, lack the historical awareness or cultural literacy to see what he's actually doing. But to Black people watching, to Black people experiencing it, it's the same old game being played on a new stage. And now, as Black content creators continue to call him out and expose his behavior, he's at a crossroads. He can either continue down this path, escalating his obsession until he inevitably self destructs, or he can recognize that his fixation is unhealthy and step away. But let's be real. As long as there's money to be made from his anti Black addiction, he's probably not going anywhere. After all, what would What's the Dirt be without Black people? Like whiteness itself? Nothing. I know what you're thinking. Did they just beat Switch? Yes, they did. The war between the United States, Israel, and Iran is real. Missile strikes, retaliation, all of that is happening. Iran is still standing, and the United States hasn't accomplished what it said it would. That's one battlefield. The other one is in your hand. This is the first time in history where the so called enemy is already inside through the same apps you open when you wake up, when you're bored, when you're just trying to scroll and not think about anything. The Iranian government has been ruthlessly trolling Donald Trump, but now they've gone beyond flat memes. Now they're rapping and invoking our art form and our dead to send a message, not to our government, to us. Rap music is not neutral. It has never been neutral. It came out of people telling the truth about power when nobody else would. Rap has always been political, and it has always been ours. That's what makes this moment hit different. Because now you've got a foreign government tapping into the same energy, that same sound, that same voice, and sending it right back at us. And the wild part is, it doesn't sound off. Americans are quick to call out bad AI. You hear it immediately when it's complete trash. The flow is weird, the timing is off. The whole thing feels fake. But these tracks, they're not bad. The beats kind of knock. The cadence is right. The delivery feels familiar. They sound like something that could live in the same space as everything else we already listen to. So people don't treat it like propaganda. They treat it like a diss track. And once it crosses that line, once it sounds good enough to pass, it moves. People share it. People react to it. People argue about it. It becomes part of the culture cycle instead of something propaganda campaigns in the history of modern warfare. And the United States is taking nothing but L's. Propaganda is bad, okay? Let's just say that. Propaganda is dangerous because it doesn't try to inform you, it tries to steer you without you realizing it. It takes real emotions, real issues, and real grievances and reshapes them into something designed to push a specific outcome. The problem isn't just that it can be misleading, it's that it feels familiar and true, which lowers your guard. Once that happens, people start repeating it, spreading it, and building opinions around it without questioning where it came from or why it was made. It turns conversation into manipulation and replaces understanding with reaction. And over time, that distorts how people see reality and each other. And when enough people are influenced that way, it starts shaping decisions, policy, and even the direction of a country or a war. The propaganda used by Iran is especially dangerous. The use of AI goes beyond visuals and beats. The content carries vocal patterns, cadence, and delivery styles associated with Black American speech. It mirrors our tone, rhythm, and linguistic structure in a way that signals familiarity to generated artificially and paired with imagery and messaging centered on Black and Brown experiences around the world, but specifically in America, it functions as a performed identity. It presents itself as a voice from within the community it's talking to. And that is digital blackface. That's taking a Black art form, a Black voice, a Black cadence, and putting it on like a costume to carry a message. Not just speaking to us, but speaking as if it's one of us. The content focuses on ideas that already exist in American discourse. It centers on inequality, historical harm, anti war sentiment, and distrust of government. It does not need to introduce those ideas because they're already familiar to us. The message aligns itself with conversations that we're already having. For a subset of the audience, that alignment creates recognition and affirmation. The content feels like a continuation of something they already understand. It does not need to persuade from the ground up. It reinforces what is already there. especially in Black and Brown communities. But make no mistake, the impact of rap reaches far beyond the Black and Brown communities in America. Because the fact of the matter is, white people are the largest consumers of hip hop, young, male, white people. So when the message shows up, it doesn't feel like an outside opinion. It feels like a reflection. It feels like somebody taking what's already being said and putting it on a beat. That's the Killmonger effect. Killmonger resonated because his grievances were rooted in realities the audience could recognize. The character created a moment of understanding even for viewers who rejected his methods. That sense of recognition is enough to generate engagement. The content circulating now operates in that same space. It relies on familiarity and emotional clarity. It produces a reaction that does not require full agreement in order to spread. That's all this content needs. It doesn't need everybody. It needs a subset of people to hear it and say, yeah, and that's enough. And Iran is doing this using things we built, our platforms, our culture, our language, our art. You don't have to overpower a system if you can move inside it. You don't have to convince everybody if you can tap into what a portion of people already believe and give it a form that spreads. And right now, that form is rap. War used to be something you watched on the news, something filtered, delayed, explained to you. Now it's something that shows up between a meme and a music video, something that sounds good, something that feels like family, something that doesn't announce itself as what it actually is. Rap isn't separate from that. Rap is in it. The result is a form of warfare that operates through cultural fluency, technological capability, and strategic alignment with existing beliefs and political positions. Rap functions as a delivery system because it carries credibility, emotion, and global reach. And now a Black art form is being lifted, replicated through AI, and turned back on Americans as a tool of weaponized influence. That's something being taken and worn. It forces a real question. How are we supposed to feel watching our art, our voice, our cultural language get hijacked, synthesized, and used to shape perception here in America? Propaganda has always existed, but this hits different because it's not coming at you directly. It's coming through something we built, something that carries real history and meaning, now repurposed in a way that blurs the line between expression and manipulation. Or is it? Maybe it's just a reflection of a shared experience. You see what happens? Because when it comes through the channel of rap, it doesn't feel like war. And that's exactly why it's working. Drake wants to be the Joker so badly. Not just any Joker either. Specifically, Drake wants to be Heath Ledger's Joker, the cool Joker, the respected Joker, the Joker audiences mythologize because he seemed larger than life, intellectually dangerous, impossible to control, the kind of villain whose presence bends the entire story around him. But there is one critical detail about Heath Ledger's Joker that Drake seems unable to escape. The Joker needs Batman to survive. Batman does not need the Joker. There are really three Jokers relevant to this moment. The first is the Joker in a deck of cards, the wild card, the disruptor, the extra piece inserted into the game to change the rules and create chaos. That is the image Drake wants for himself post Kendrick. The unpredictable anti-hero, too culturally dominant to ever really lose. The second Joker is, yes, Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight. This is the archetype Drake appears obsessed with becoming. This is a Joker that is not just chaotic, he is respected for his chaos. He forces everyone around him to react. He becomes culturally magnetic because he appears fearless and untouchable. But his entire philosophy collapses without Batman. The Joker himself admits this. Batman gives his existence meaning. Batman is the center of gravity. The Joker is the reaction orbiting around him. And then there is the third Joker, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, the actual incel, the socially alienated grievance addict who mistakes humiliation for depth and spectacle for purpose. A man spiraling publicly while convincing himself the spiral is revolutionary. That is the Joker that Drake symbolizes, because Iceman does not sound like a victorious supervillain. It sounds like a man emotionally trapped in the fallout of losing control of his narrative. 40 plus songs later, and Kendrick is still there, haunting the project through sneak disses, wounded pride, bitterness, paranoia, and endless attempts to reclaim dominance without ever directly confronting the source of the humiliation. Kendrick's name barely needs to be spoken by anyone because his shadow hangs over the entire release. Drake, meanwhile, keeps circling the same emotional crater over and over again. The more he tries to project invincibility, the more obvious it becomes that he still needs Kendrick as a reference point. He needs Batman in the story because without Batman, the Joker is just a man screaming at strangers. And now Drake's aesthetic has been absorbed by the MAGA ecosystem. The White House X account posting doctored Iceman imagery resembling white power symbolism is not just a random meme. It represents a larger cultural absorption. Drake's persona, especially after this rollout, is increasingly compatible with internet spaces driven by grievance, irony poisoning, perpetual victimhood, and algorithmic outrage. The same online culture that thrives on owning the libs and being anti woke and humiliation rituals and endless engagement farming also loves Joker archetypes, not disciplined revolutionaries, jokers, men who confuse attention or fear with respect, men who build entire identities around feeling persecuted while demanding the world stare at them constantly, men whose instability becomes content. And that is the danger for Drake because he thinks he is becoming Heath Ledger's Joker. Feared, iconic, culturally untouchable. But the more repetitive, bitter, and emotionally stagnant the music is, the more he risks looking like Joaquin Phoenix's Joker instead. Isolated, resentful, obsessed with grievance, and surrounded by audiences who are not actually invested in him as an artist so much as they are entertained by the spectacle of his unraveling. That is why Iceman feels so bleak to people who listen to it. The album was supposed to reestablish Drake as the ultimate anti-hero. Instead, it exposed how dependent his current identity has become on conflict with another man. The wild card became predictable. The chaos stopped feeling dangerous. And the man trying to position himself as Batman's greatest enemy started looking more like someone begging Batman to keep acknowledging him because the Joker's greatest fear is not losing to Batman. It is Batman moving on without him. And now the only thing left is the human equivalent of a bot farm, MAGA. Just like people clocked the problematic imagery in his Iceman website zine, Drake chose to put on Michael Jackson's glove and position his fingers into a well-known white power symbol. Drake's fans are desperate for it all to mean something else. They are desperate for Drake to be relevant and to be on top so they can rest at his feet and guzzle his blue-balled jizz. Drake's fans need him to win so they do not have to confront what following him has increasingly come to represent. 3 bloated, critically mocked albums suddenly become strategy. Weak bars become bait. Repetition becomes world building. They insist the real masterpiece is coming later, after the UMG deal ends, because admitting Iceman might actually reflect Drake's current artistic abilities would force a much uglier realization. Maybe the man they built entire identities around is stuck, emotionally stagnant, and culturally drifting into something reactionary and hollow. The same denial appears around the imagery for the Iceman album. Drake flashes a hand pose widely recognized in extremist and white power circles, and suddenly his audience develops collective historical amnesia. It's a reach. Nobody knows that symbol. You're overthinking it. But that excuse only really works on people who do not read and do not realize how thoroughly internet manosphere culture has already reshaped their instincts. Because red pill culture trains people to dismiss context, mock interpretation, worship grievance, and treat every criticism as persecution. That is why so much of Drake's audience now responds less like music fans and more like ideological defenders protecting their worldview. The music barely matters anymore. The quality barely matters anymore. Drake has become a vessel for emotionally underdeveloped men who need him to remain dominant because his dominance validates them. If he loses, if the art is actually bad, if the symbolism keeps getting more problematic, if the obsession with Kendrick keeps making him look smaller instead of stronger, then the fantasy collapses. And underneath the fantasy is just a man spiraling publicly while an army of irony poisoned fans insist the breakdown is actually genius. Leon Thomas Jefferson is wild. When Jack Harlow sat on the New York Times podcast and said he got blacker, making an R&B album, the instinct is to roll your eyes and file it under tone deaf white boy says something wild. Cue all the smart people ready to break down the cultural theft and appropriation of Black art throughout history. But that's not actually what's interesting here. What's interesting is that he told on himself, because what he described is not him getting closer to Blackness, it's him leaning all the way into a very specific kind of whiteness, the kind that treats Black culture like a setting you can toggle on for a project. Blackness is not a genre. It's not a vibe pack. It's not a mood board you scroll through when your rollout needs some texture. It's a lived condition with history, pressure, contradiction, and consequence baked into it. You don't get to get blacker the way you get more experimental with your sound. But whiteness comes with range. It comes with the ability to step into Black spaces, take the language, take the cadences, take the sonic palette, and then step right back out when it's time to rebrand, reset, or pivot to country music. That white privilege is what Jack Harlow is actually describing. And the wild part is he framed it like growth, like he leveled up. If making R&B makes you blacker, then what does that say about how you view the people who actually built R&B? What does that say about how you understand the difference between influence and identity? You're collapsing an entire culture into a sound you can experiment with. We've seen this movie before, different decade, different face, same script. Black culture innovates, pushes, creates something undeniable. The industry hesitates, undervalues it, sometimes straight up resists it. Then a white artist steps in, engages it, and suddenly it's framed as fresh, exciting, accessible. Now there's a story. Now there's a narrative arc. Now there's someone that people who were never going to engage with the culture directly can latch on to. When Jack says he got blacker, he's suggesting that he took a trip, learned some things, and came back different. But Black people don't get to experience Blackness like a destination or a departure point. There is no, I tried being Black for a season and here's what I learned. There is no off ramp, no toggle, no rebrand. And that's where the whiteness shows up loud. That his interaction with Black culture is primarily about him, his growth, his evolution, his artistic expansion. The culture is secondary. It's a tool, a backdrop, a resource. Seeing Blackness as a commodity is what makes it easy to forget that Black people are not props, aesthetics, or raw material for someone else's identity. They're human beings. Once Blackness gets reduced to something you can buy, imitate, perform, or discard, the people attached to it start to disappear in the public imagination. Their culture gets celebrated while their lived reality gets ignored. Their style gets copied while their voices get sidelined. Their creativity gets monetized while their humanity is negotiated. And that's how you end up in a world where Blackness is everywhere, on playlists, in ads, in fashion, in language. But actual Black people are still fighting to be seen, heard, and treated like full human beings. The commodification is not separate from the dehumanization. It's the engine that makes it run. What really stands out in the interview is how he talks about white contemporaries like he's somehow outside of that category. Like making R&B gives him distance from the same safety net whiteness has always provided him. But nothing about his position actually changes. He still benefits from the same soft landing, the same presumption of relatability, the same room to experiment without being boxed in or over policed. Singing Black music doesn't relocate him outside of whiteness. It just expands what he can do within it. And framing himself as adjacent to rather than part of his white peers lets him borrow the credibility of proximity to Black culture while quietly holding on to all the protections that come with being white in the first place. He also claims to be hyper aware of politics. Black art has never had the luxury of being apolitical, and that's the part he seems to be skimming past. It wasn't created in a vacuum. It was forged under segregation, surveillance, resistance, survival, and the constant negotiation of visibility in a country that has always erased Black existence. There is no version of Black art that sits outside of that reality. Framing the political dimension like an extra burden he now has to carry just highlights the gap between engaging the culture and actually living within the conditions that define it. He exercised his white privilege to take from it for his own financial gain. And that privilege is doing all the work. It's the same freedom that lets a white artist experiment with R&B and get praised for versatility, while a Black artist doing the same thing just gets labeled R&B and left there. It's the same freedom that turns exploration into branding and branding into market value. He's able to draw from Black culture like someone using credit, pulling what he needs, building something with it, and walking away with the upside while never carrying the debt that comes with it for Black artists. The scrutiny, the stereotypes, the consequences that don't disappear when the moment is over. That combination, access without liability, freedom without exposure, is not neutral. It's a function of white power, even when it doesn't announce itself that way. So when he talks about getting Blacker, he's really talking about engaging the culture under protection while others have to live inside it without that safety. He made an R&B album. That's not really the story. The story is how comfortable he felt describing that move as becoming Blacker. Like Blackness is a quality he can absorb or display and then fold into his persona. And until people start calling that out directly, we're going to keep having the same tired conversation about influence versus appropriation. Like this is just a misunderstanding instead of a pattern. He said exactly what he meant. And what he meant is that he sees Blackness as something he can use to become more interesting. That's not him getting blacker. That's Jack Harlow getting very, very comfortable with white power. The phrase race traitor is not modern slang. It's an old American concept rooted in periods when racial hierarchy was enforced not just by law, but by violence, intimidation, and social consensus. In the Jim Crow South, white people, particularly white women who opposed segregation, defended Black neighbors, formed interracial friendships, or crossed romantic boundaries, were often branded traitors to their race. This branding did not come solely from the Klan. It came from sheriffs, judges, neighbors, employers, churches, newspapers, and the broader culture of enforcement that defined who belonged and who did not. This is the historical lens through which the killing of Renee Good and the federal government's response to it must be viewed. Renee Good was a white woman killed by a federal immigration officer during a so-called enforcement operation in Minneapolis. The federal government has since treated her death as justified, declined to open a civil rights investigation, and allowed the officer involved to remain uncharged. In the days that followed, senior federal prosecutors resigned rather than participate in what they viewed as a deliberate sidelining of civil rights accountability. Meanwhile, the government redirected investigative focus towards Good's partner. This is not merely a dispute over use of force standards. It's a situation of institutional loyalty, enforcement power, and what happens when someone crosses a line they were not supposed to cross. In the Jim Crow South, white women who advocated for racial equality were not protected by their whiteness. On the contrary, their whiteness made their dissent intolerable. They were seen as undermining the racial order from within. A white woman who spoke against lynching, who challenged segregation, who defended Black people against police violence, or who dared to love across racial lines, was treated not as misguided, but as dangerous. Those white women were accused of betraying their race, destabilizing society, and inviting chaos. Violence against such women was often justified implicitly, even when not carried out by masked men. Law enforcement looked away. Courts declined to act. Communities closed ranks. The message was very clear. There were boundaries to whiteness, and those boundaries were enforced. That same logic echoes today. What makes the Renee Good case especially revealing is not only the killing itself, but the documented attitude of the federal Klan member after she was dead. He recorded himself murdering her, which, according to the government, is now standard training, and then called her a fucking bitch as her lifeless body barreled down the street in her car. This detail matters not because it proves legal guilt on its own, but because it exposes contempt. It strips away any pretense of neutral enforcement and reveals how the officer viewed her in that moment, not as a citizen, not as a person deserving restraint or dignity, but as an enemy who had earned her fate. Contempt is not incidental in systems of oppression. It is foundational. In Jim Crow America, contempt for race traitors justifies cruelty and violence. A white woman who interfered with racial enforcement was not merely wrong, she was obscene, immoral, corrupt. Language mattered. Dehumanization mattered. It created permission structures, permission for violence, permission for indifference, permission for institutional abandonment. The federal government's response to Good's killing follows a similar permission structure. By refusing to open a civil rights investigation, the Department of Justice has signaled that certain killings by federal agents are not worthy of that scrutiny. By excluding the Civil Rights Division and watching prosecutors resign in protest, it has demonstrated that accountability itself is now negotiable. By focusing investigative energy on Good's partner rather than the agent who fired the fatal shots, it has reframed the event away from state violence and toward civilian culpability. This is how systems protect themselves. In the Jim Crow South, the Klan was not the whole system, it was the blunt instrument. The real power lay in the everyday enforcement of racial norms by institutions that claimed legitimacy. Sheriffs enforced segregation, judges upheld it, legislatures codified it. The Klan simply did openly what the state did quietly. In this analogy, ICE is not merely an agency. It is an enforcement arm operating with broad discretion and political insulation. And the federal government's response, closing ranks, declining investigation, defending the agent, mirrors the historical pattern of state institutions protecting their own authority over individual life. When you are deemed a race traitor, you don't lose your proximity to whiteness. But when you face the oppressor, you lose the standard protection that whiteness promises. Renee Good's whiteness did not save her because her actions placed her outside the category of protected whiteness. Historically, whiteness was never unconditional. It was contingent on compliance, on silence, on knowing one's place. White women in the Jim Crow South learned this lesson brutally. Many paid with their safety, their reputations, their livelihoods, and sometimes their lives. Their suffering served as warning. Warnings are still being issued today. When a federal agent can kill a civilian, record it, express contempt, and face no legal consequence, while prosecutors who object are the ones who lose their jobs, that is not simply a policy choice, it is a signal. It tells the public who is protected, who is expendable, and whose resistance will not be tolerated. The President of the United States didn't just label Renee a domestic terrorist, he said she was disrespectful. And that's the only justification that was needed to blow her fucking head off. Calling Renee Good a race traitor in this context is not an insult. It is an analytical description of how power interpreted her existence. She violated an unspoken rule. She interfered. She stood in opposition to an enforcement action. She crossed a boundary that enforcement institutions believe civilians, especially those presumed to benefit from the system, should never cross. In the Jim Crow South, such women were reminders that oppression requires consent, or at least silence, from those it privileges. When that silence breaks, the response is swift and unforgiving. What makes this moment so dangerous is not only the killing of Renee Good, but the normalization of the response to it, the erosion of civil rights investigation norms, the punishment of dissenting prosecutors, the rhetorical framing that casts resistance as threat. History teaches us that when the state abandons accountability, it does not do so selectively for long. Renee Good's murder is not just a tragedy, it is a warning written in the language of enforcement power that America has seen before and ignored at great cost. Here's a question. Do the Epstein files only matter if they hurt Trump, or do they matter because they document a massive abuse network, regardless of who gets named? Here's where we are. The so-called final Epstein files dump does not incriminate Trump in any material or meaningful way. Not legally, not narratively, not in a way that forces consequences. In that sense, it landed as a complete nothing burger. All that buildup, all that anticipation, and the biggest name in American politics walks out basically untouched again. And the reaction tells you everything you need to know. The world is now talking about a bunch of men, and yes, some women, whose names mean very little to the American public. Foreign royals, financiers, socialites, media figures, background elites. Serious allegations, disturbing patterns, real abuse, and yet the energy just is not there. Because let's be honest, most people were not waiting for Epstein accountability in the abstract, they were waiting for Trump. That is the uncomfortable truth no one wants to say out loud. The files mattered most to people because of who they hoped would be exposed. Once it became clear Trump was not going to be meaningfully implicated, the oxygen left the room. The story did not deepen, it deflated. So now what? Well, now Trump has done what he always does. He has walked out of the rubble like a cockroach after a nuclear blast. Singed, maybe, mentioned, but alive, mobile, and politically functional. No reckoning, no decisive narrative shift, no moment that forces even his supporters to pause. Just another escape. And into that vacuum steps Congress, not to force DOJ compliance, not to finish the job on Epstein accountability, not to grapple with institutional failure. Instead, they pivot. Suddenly, the focus swings hard towards the Clintons, old villains, familiar targets, safe terrain, a move that feels less like justice and more like narrative salvage. If Trump is not the story, someone has to be, which raises the real question underneath all of this. Was this ever about the abuse network, or was it about landing a political kill shot? Because if the abuse itself were the priority, their response would not collapse the moment Trump slipped the net. The failure to sustain outrage tells you the system, meaning the media, Congress, and yeah, the public, was never prepared to deal with Epstein as a structural crime story. It was treated as a personality driven scandal. And once the biggest personality walked away, the urgency evaporated. That's the bleak ending here. Not that Trump escaped, because that part is depressingly familiar, but that his escape seems to have drained the will to care about anyone else. The victims do not matter less, the crimes don't matter less, but in practice, the story does. And that says something deeply rotten about how accountability works in this country. If it does not take down the most famous man in the room, we are ready to move on. Trump has been publicly linked to Epstein for years. His name appears thousands of times in the files, in references that, for any other politician, would end their career and start a criminal investigation. Photographs, social appearances, prior reporting, none of this is new. Yet, in the largest disclosure of Epstein related material ever released, Trump emerges as a background character rather than a focal point. That doesn't happen by accident. Narrative gravity doesn't just disappear. We've seen this playbook before. In past Epstein file disclosures, documents went up, and then quietly came down. Unflattering allegations showed up for a moment and then disappeared, usually without any real explanation, at least not any that satisfied the people. Now, in this latest release, the DOJ is insisting it's not doing anything to protect the president, while at the same time deciding what gets highlighted, what gets buried, and what gets lost in a flood of documents. You can't honestly claim both of those things at once. The Department of Justice is saying it complied with the law. On paper, that may be true, but compliance is not the same as accountability. Transparency that cannot be meaningfully processed is not transparency at all. It is political theater. It really comes down to one of two things. Either the Department of Justice and the FBI are so out of control that they withheld or worse, destroyed files that would have incriminated Donald Trump, or there are no Trump files because there never were to begin with. There isn't a third option that makes sense. That would mean the problem is not just political bias or bad judgment, but institutional rot. It would mean that when evidence points too close to the center of power, the system is capable of quietly making it disappear and then daring anyone to prove it ever existed. If that is true, then transparency laws are also theater, document dumps are stagecraft, and accountability only applies to people without power. If agencies can selectively manage history at that level, then no future disclosure can ever be trusted. Every absence becomes suspicious. Every gap becomes a question mark. And the public is left arguing over shadows instead of facts, which is exactly where institutions like to keep things when they do not want answers on the public record. Option two, there are no Trump files because there never were. There's no hidden trove, no suppressed smoking gun, no missing archive waiting to be unlocked. Trump may have been adjacent to Epstein socially, but not criminally in a way that produced evidence. If that is the case, then the endless buildup around the Epstein files was never about uncovering the truth. It was about expectation. People wanted a reckoning for Donald Trump so badly that they assumed the files had to deliver one. Both options are bad. One suggests an unaccountable national security and law enforcement apparatus that can erase problems at the top. The other suggests a political culture that treats accountability as valuable only if it produces a specific villain. Either the system is corrupt enough to hide the truth, or the public was projecting meaning onto a story that could not bear it. And who knows, maybe it's a little of both. And notice how quickly everyone pivots once that tension becomes unavoidable. Instead of sitting with the implications, Congress lunges toward safer targets. The media reframes. The public disengages. Because wrestling with either possibility requires something people rarely want to do, accept that there may be no satisfying ending. That is the real fallout of the Epstein files. Not just that Trump walked away again, but that the absence of incriminating material forces a reckoning no one seems eager to have. Either the institutions meant to protect the public cannot be trusted at all, or the story so many people needed was never there. And neither answer gives anyone the closure they were hoping for. Drake hates women. That probably sounds ridiculous to people who don't know any better, and especially to his male glazers who view women and how to interact with them in the same way as Drake. The kind of dudes who reduced women to females a long time ago. After all, Drake's entire career is built around females. His music is filled with females. His image is filled with females. His social media is filled with females. His stories are filled with females. People assume that because a man wants women, sleeps with women, dates women, talks about women, posts pictures about women, and has statues made of women, he must therefore like women. LOL, child, please. Plenty of men are obsessed with women. Plenty of men desire women. They build their identities around women, how to get them, keep them, or why women are the reason they can't accomplish either. That doesn't mean they respect women. It doesn't mean they see women as complete human beings. It's the obsession that becomes evidence of the problem. Hip hop has struggled with misogyny for generations, but Drake represents a particularly modern version of it. Older rappers sold their fantasy of domination. Drake sells the fantasy of victimhood, and he turns women into objects to do it. His entire brand is built around the idea that women are constantly doing something to him, leaving him, betraying him, using him, choosing somebody else, refusing to appreciate him properly. The details change from album to album, but the underlying story is constant. Drake is the injured party, and the women around him are responsible. He is hip hop's first true incel. Women are nothing but plot devices for Drake. Their purpose is to advance Drake's fantasy of himself. Their role is to validate him, reject him, disappoint him, tempt him, betray him, make him jealous, or sit on the shelf as a prize for him. Everything revolves around Drake's emotional experience. The woman doesn't matter. For somebody who has spent 2 decades presenting himself as one of the world's most desirable men, Drake's relationship history is empty. Women enter the story, women leave the story. New women arrive. The cycle repeats. There are rumors, situationships, public appearances, vacation photos, Instagram follows, subliminals, scandals. Women function as proof that Drake is desirable, proof that Drake is successful, proof that Drake still matters, and that other men should envy him. And once women become nothing more than proof, they're no longer being treated as people. They're being treated as objects. That's where the conversation becomes darker because Drake doesn't simply objectify women, he weaponizes them. Look at how women repeatedly appear during his conflicts with other men. A rival emerges, a disagreement happens, a feud develops. Then somehow a woman connected to the situation enters the picture. The woman may have had nothing to do with the conflict itself, yet she becomes part of the narrative anyway. The recent Solange situation is a perfect example. Nobody believed that post was about Solange. Nobody believed Drake suddenly wanted to celebrate her artistry. Nobody thought it was an appreciation post. The conversation immediately became about Jay-Z because everybody understood the purpose of the post. Solange wasn't being treated as an individual. She was being used as a weapon in a conflict between men. And that's the reoccurring theme. Women become leverage. They become scoreboards. They become trophies, status symbols, pressure points, ammunition. In Drake's world, women still exist primarily in relation to a man. Women still function as objects rather than subjects. Women still serve a purpose rather than possessing agency, to be left alone and write their own narrative. A man can spend his entire life chasing women while resenting them. A man can spend his entire life seeking validation from women while resenting them, and spend his entire life needing women while resenting them. And the strongest proof is not just that women are mentioned, it is the pattern of how they are mentioned as comparative trophies, social media metrics, sexual review material, family shame vectors, or rumor triggers. Drake's lines about Nicki Minaj, Serena Williams, Rihanna, Sophie, Megan Thee Stallion, and Whitney all fit one or more of those molds, even when the immediate target is actually another dude. When a woman does answer back, as Megan did, the complaint is that Drake used her pain and her body for clout or ridicule. When a woman does not, the silence itself is turned into material, as in the Whitney rumors and the Serena liked comment episode. The strongest evidence that Drake hates women isn't that he talks about women. Lots of rappers talk about women. The real question is what role those women play when they show up. Look at the pattern. Nicki becomes a way to disrespect Meek. Serena becomes a way to take shots at her husband. Rihanna becomes a way to compare himself to ASAP Rocky. Whitney becomes ammunition against Kendrick. Kylie becomes another piece on the board in a conflict between men. Sometimes Drake uses women as scoreboards. Serena was supposedly an upgrade. Nicki's success became proof Meek was beneath her. Rihanna's posting habits became evidence in a conversation about ASAP Rocky. Other times, he uses women as insults. Rihanna gets reduced to a sexual review. Sophie gets reduced to the woman who had his child. Megan becomes material for jokes in bars while recovering from being shot. And when none of that is available, the rumors become the weapon. Anybody connected to a rival suddenly becomes fair game for gossip, speculation, accusations, and fan investigations. Then the internet fills in the blanks and runs wild. Drake doesn't have to say the thing outright because millions of fans are willing to say it for him. The rumor spreads anyway. The harassment happens anyway. The woman gets dragged anyway. Whitney gets accused of cheating. Serena gets turned into a punchline. Rihanna gets reduced to her relationship status. Megan gets mocked. The crowd takes over from there, ranking them, investigating them, speculating about them, and treating their lives like evidence in a case they're trying to win on behalf of Drake. Even outside of rap beef, the pattern still shows up. Look at Halle Berry. That wasn't a feud. There was no rival rapper involved. Yet Halle still found herself publicly objecting to Drake using her image without permission because, from her perspective, consent and basic respect came second to whatever effect he was trying to achieve. This isn't one song, it isn't one lyric, it isn't one bad decision. It's a pattern that stretches across years, across albums, across feuds, and across completely different women. A woman's body, a woman's relationship, a woman's reputation, a woman's silence, a woman's support. Drake doesn't just talk about women, he uses them without their consent. And that's because Drake hates women. Few men in modern history have had more access to beautiful, talented, smart, successful women than Drake. Yet, for all the women who have escaped his orbit, there is a striking absence of evidence that he actually knows how to love a woman, not desire, not sleep with, not show off, love. Build a life with. Respect her boundaries, respect her privacy, respect her humanity when doing so no longer benefits him. The story of Drake's career is not a man who can't get women, it's a man who can't find meaning in them once they've stopped serving a purpose for him. That's why so many of his interactions with women are transactional, performative, or adversarial. They're not companions, they're mirrors. They're there to tell him he's attractive, important, desired, relevant, and powerful. And when another human being exists primarily to maintain your self image, eventually you stop seeing them as a person and start seeing them as a tool. That's the thread connecting all of these incidents going back over a decade. Drake doesn't weaponize women because he loves them. He weaponizes women because he doesn't. Because somewhere underneath the fame, the money, the validation, the abs, and the endless parade of beautiful women is a man deeply resentful that women are people rather than possessions, and who keeps trying to turn them into possessions anyway. It's been 5 years since the release of The Melodic Blue, and Baby Keem is back with his sophomore album, Casino. Casino can be broken down into two phases, the rollout and the music itself. Most artists who are preparing to release just their second studio album would announce it months in advance because it takes that long to spread the word and build anticipation. Keem announced Casino with 10 days to spare, and he made the most of it. Website, physical merch, a tour announcement, and best of all, a three-part documentary series that frames the man behind the art. And that is the first component of a successful rollout. Clear concept framing. Boo Man 1, 2, and 3 tell us what era this is, what emotional tones it carries, why Casino exists, and how it is different from the melodic blue. Good rollouts answer the subconscious question, why should I care about this? Without framing, the album feels like product. With framing, it feels like a marker in time. The audience needs a reason bigger than new music. People drop new music 1,000 times a day. A good rollout creates redemption or reinvention, a vulnerability reveal, conflict, tension, or cultural positioning. Even if it's subtle, the public doesn't just stream songs, they listen to stories. The public wants evolution or validation. Either I've grown or I'm still him. Ambiguity here creates confusion. A rollout should signal trajectory. 10 days is short, and that matters. A short runway only works if anticipation already exists, and in this case, it did. Keem didn't need a 3-month hype cycle. The demand was latent. The short window prevented fatigue and created compression, and compression intensifies attention. It turns album coming soon into album is imminent. Imminence drives urgency. For a second studio album, the risk is stagnation. Instead of leading with a single, he led with a full narrative. The documentary series did something important. It humanized him. It created vulnerability. It slowed his image down and framed an origin story and the growth from that. It positioned the album as a culmination. It's not just vulnerability for sympathy, it's vulnerability as credibility. When fans feel like they've been let inside, they invest more heavily in the art. This wasn't just social media posts, it was infrastructure, and that signals seriousness. Artists who treat albums like events use ecosystem strategy, not just streaming platforms. There's physical media plus a website that equals ownership and permanence. A tour announcement equals a long tail monetization, and a live streamed event is a communal moment. And all of that creates scale. The live listening party was genius, and strategically, it was a momentum multiplier. Live streamed listening events do two things: turns passive fans into participants and creates a real time discourse. When people are watching together, they start tweeting, clipping, reacting, speculating, writing scripts about strategy. That makes the rollout feel much bigger. A rollout like that only works if the artist believes the music will survive first contact, because what he did wasn't hedging. He compressed the timeline. He centered his truth, which is vulnerability. He live streamed reactions in real time, and he performed material before streaming numbers could validate it. And he tied all of that directly to a tour. There are two types of confidence in rollouts. First, there's defensive confidence: careful singles, heavy playlist seeding, influencer drip, algorithm strategy first. And then there's offensive confidence. It's narrative first. It's community activation, live moment. Let the culture respond organically. Keem wasn't hiding behind, let's see how it charts. He made it a moment before the numbers even existed. That's artist led momentum instead of metric led momentum. A seamless hybrid listening party. Pre recorded segments blended with live performance, time cues, light transitions. That's not accidental, that's rehearsal. That's production management. That's creative direction. That's someone treating an album release like a show, not just a drop. And that signals a few things at once. First, seriousness. When an artist builds a controlled live moment with technical precision, they're saying this is an era launch, not a content upload. It communicates discipline, not just artistry, but operational competence. Second, confidence in execution. Live moments are dangerous. Audio glitches, there's awkward pacing, energy dips. They kill momentum instantly. If it ran clean and intentional, that means it was storyboarded, it was rehearsed, there was technical coordination. The artist trusted the material enough to perform it before public metrics. It wasn't perfect, but at the same time, it was flawless. Third, it showed respect for the audience. A sloppy live stream feels disposable. A produced event feels like you're inviting people into something that is curated. It rewards the fans who showed up in real time. That creates loyalty and investment. And here's the deeper layer: For a second studio album, pulling off that kind of hybrid event says, I'm not just making songs, I'm building experiences. That's the difference between here's my album and here's my world. Now, let's talk about the music. Production is a 10 out of 10 for me. For an album that isn't even 40 minutes long, each track feels complete, and the casino theme is perfect. This album has lows and highs, pain and joy, and even a little whimsy. It's silly and serious, and ping pongs you through a range of Keem's experiences, emotions, and his creativity. This is a man who loves music, and it comes through. Here are some of my favorites. Casino. Over Ricardo Got Wings' ominous production, punctuated by the flashing sirens of a slot machine payout, Keem delivers one of the project's most revealing moments. This young man reflects on how accumulating wealth hasn't quieted the wounds he assumed money would fix. And he speaks candidly about growing up without the kind of parental support that softens life's harder blows. It's a level of emotional clarity and restraint we haven't consistently heard from him before, and he allows himself to sit in the weight of it rather than deflect. House Money plays like a volatile anthem on the surface, but underneath the bravado is a through line of abandonment, distrust, and emotional armor. The lonely, vulnerable intro sharply contrasts with Keem's aggressive dismissal of intimacy, suggesting that the ego and detachment are defensive mechanisms rather than pure arrogance. Lines about disloyalty and being left in the back of a stash house hint at early instability, reframing his cynicism towards women and obsession with self reliance as survival instincts. The Feist Honey Honey sample on Birds and the Bees gives Casino a rare exhale moment, carving out a softer space amid the album's unrelenting energy. Keem transforms wide eyed devotion into a hypnotic hook, structuring the chorus around a playful day of the week rhyme that feels light on its feet, but engineered to linger long after the track ends. I Am Not a Lyricist stands as some of Keem's sharpest rapping on the project. He strips away the bravado to confront his past, reflecting on personal wounds and relatives consumed by the temptations of the city of sin, forces that shape the person he's become. Good Flirts is one of many that is sonically surprising. There are two cutie patooties, one, a proven assassin, rapping about booty, after a great interpolation of The Light. I ran this track back a few times. Then there's Sex Appeal. I love this track. I listened to it 5 times before moving on to the next. Too Short is perfect, and I felt transported. While much of Casino leans into weight and solitude, Dramatic Girl breaks through like a shaft of light in a storm. The song is adorable. Fueled by infatuation, Keem dives headfirst into the pursuit, framing love as an underwater quest where he's willing to plunge into the depths to reach her heart. This song has whimsy. That's a form of vulnerability. It's a good damn song, and it showcases the growth of a man because real niggas love too. No Blame closes out the project with Keem addressing his mom. That it comes after Dramatic Girl only underscores the range of emotions translated through sound on the album. It's a pinball machine experience, knocking the listener from the whirlwind of love back to the reality of lives lived and how one life can impact another. Casino is not a perfect album, but it is a confident one, and it should be. It doesn't chase virality, nor does it overextend itself trying to prove growth. Instead, it trusts that the evolution will be heard. The production swings between tension and release. The writing toggles between armor and exposure, and the performances feel deliberate rather than reactive. More importantly, it feels authored, not assembled. For a sophomore effort arriving after years of anticipation, that kind of clarity and control matters more than perfection. And that is what makes it brilliant.